This is just funny. Um, ich halte basically as I was talking about thermal stain. No, I've been learning this, my Melanchon, that's fine. That I this officially this year started 2 years ago. Was in Bar Park. They're still in Bar Park every week, and started with all kinds of different stuff. Noch the 2 Jahre was decided to Yiddish, English, Hebrew. Get some
alle de rijken.
My and that's how I speak. That's how I usually speak. That's what usually happens. And then if there's someone that can
can speak in Yiddish, no problem.
So this was decided on that land in the Zach line. So got a lot of there's a lot of I think political subjects. So not that political. I mean, I didn't know we learned last year a lot about Hashgacha Prutis. That was the last thing we learned. Everything gets back to this. That's why there's a problem. We learned about Charva Oynish, Machloike the Rambam, the Shara Gmel, with the Rambam, with the all of these things, Kuris, big sigyas, which are easier to learn because at least we know somewhat what we're talking about. So to understand like the terminology, the basic alibis. So that was we did a lot. What did we learn about? 2 years ago, I learned right. So that's what 2 years ago I looked for 6 months and learned about the whole machlokes about the concept of ikra. Nicht was the ikra not if they are. Like if there's ikra and a tofel, what it means. I have a list of 15 different meanings.
Ikra means ikra and tofel. That's the project.
No, it's not. I have a list of 15. That's what some people thought. I have a list of like 15 different meanings of ikra, what it could be, and each one has someone that holds like I didn't make them up, but yeah. Definitely could me. I will learn also one thing about this, but it's still arim. Great.
The Rambam calls you Soidia Das.
So the Sikrim,
sometimes he calls it. He calls sometimes Ikrim also.
Yeah, that's another.
Soidia Das is
no, he's both.
Okay, that's the thing. That's the Yisod would mean like an axiom and a maskuna. But yeah, that's the Sefer Ikrim's understanding. That's it. Anyways, I'm just saying, but that's still arim. So we can even like say it's talking about the chiyah, like mitzvah, like if there's such a thing, if that makes sense, is another whole problem. But like, was darf man glauben, was ist wichtiger, der Hilchis Apekoris, und wir wissen Apekoris, mit Reisen Apekoris, mit Abunan Apekoris, Aminik, so. It's still politic. It's still not politic, but Narim.
The question we cook about.
Yeah, there's the question about everything.
Yeah, but
when you say political,
no, what I mean is that the noise is somewhat still not when the Rambam said when the Rambam said that something is the main thing. Like you said over here, you said this Amda Chachmas Leida the Chili, and he said at the end of Zay Ikra Gudel Shakal Tuliba, and the end of Aluch Dalit, I think. He doesn't mean to say Zay Ikra Gudel Shakal Lahaman, the most important thing to know. It does not only mean that. It means that this is the most important thing to know, the most to understand, as much as we could understand. And the end of the Aluch, in Sudat, and the end of Aluch Dalit, Aluch Vav, and the our Aluch. In other words, the Rambam really was the most important to understand this, and he was very clear that this is nicht has like lists and lists of reasons why not everyone's allowed to understand it. And there's a big paradox in this. This is a paradox. There's a big paradox in the Seder Advurim and the Seder Alimit, because Mitzad Echad was Mitzias Hashem, and I'm going to come to define what this meant, but that's what we're trying to figure out. I'm not sure we figure out how is the most important thing to understand. Statt zu sagen, als du Gott, wie einer gesagt, zu sagen kann jeder ein. Bei ihm meint es zu verstehen. Das verstehen pinklich. Maybe only to some extent, but not to every extent, but whatever is mind, this is mind. So this is the most important thing. It's the most important thing in the sense of Ikram, like you're saying, but it's also the most like the end goal of all Chachmas. When he says Ummah Chachmas, one of the meanings, this is based on how what's his name? I have the book here. He has like a list, story of how the Chachmas all lead to that. Couldn't let them math, of them science, of them astronomy, and of them let them God. So that, in other words, that's the most advanced. Of course, Aristotle, no. Aristotle maybe. in the other guy.
Farabi?
Yeah, that's the guy. A little book somewhere.
Oh,
One of the Rambam's rabbis. No.
Farabi?
The other guy.
In Vienna.
The Rambam had three guys.
Three? Oh, there were three.
This guy. No, not this. I think I've forgotten the book. It's one of these small books. I don't remember. Not this one. Whatever. This one.
Oh, Al-Ghazali? Al-Ghazali?
No, this book. It talks about how you have to get to happiness. That's how it starts. It's like a cute book. Happiness is this is the Greek way of putting things. Happiness, but happiness meant.
Al-Farabi?
Yeah, Al-Farabi. He was the.
Yeah, happiness means like shlemus more.
Yeah, so it ends up meaning shlemus or whatever. But anyways, that's enough. Them to wissen, that man you have to learn through the whole side of the Olam until you get to knowing God. So this is like the most advanced. On the way, and get the Aleph lernt man Chumash Rashi, and get the Bais lernt man Gemara Tosfos, and get the Gimel, whatever. There's the whole controversy of how no, maybe science, and that is definitely the Rambam in the end, and the famous Mushal. There seems to have two different letters. One is the Yiddish letter, and one is the secular letter, but there's definitely extra politic, extra controversy about to understand it. But nothing doesn't matter.
That's not political. I mean, controversial issues.
Yeah, but
Arim de Zach, not so.
It's still Arim. In other words, mentioned werden excited. Oh, so the Rambam gehalten, als lernen, okay. Seide, jetzt der gehalten, nicht so wie da Arim gehalten, beside. That's not helping me, because then now do it. Now doing it.
Analytical.
Weißt du, Lamashim sagen, I'll tell you. Lamashim sagen, als der Rambam, which is so much true. Rambam hat sich gehalten, als das ein Weg von mit sie Zweikes, I like calling it Zweikes. Actually, the Rambam's language sometimes. Is to learn whatever physics and metaphysics and math. Now everyone, a lot of people, okay, Rambam says Perish nice, the Chagiga, Masa Mekova means metaphysics, Masa Barash means physics. Okay, the Rambam's like, okay, no, you know how many years it will take to figure out that Rambam's metaphysics? I mean, Aristotle, you don't even try. So there's not the political thing. Not there. The Rambam didn't hold like, okay, no, now do it. But then you get into a problem because actually the metaphysics, so we have to get into a whole. Now you have to learn not for 10 years, for 100 years, right?
All these
things. This is the real.
So the whole controversy to do this whole controversy to do to shy Chiva for minute, right?
Yeah.
I'm doing So now, okay. Okay, what was see all do? Yeah. So now what? Okay, yet seen.
Now you have to understand. So this is the self.
Well, yeah.
No, so that's what I'm saying. So they see the Ram, and then they have people are spending all of their books, and there's so many different people worried about this. Also, that and it's so irrelevant because it's irrelevant, but it's totally so that I was bedreigt.
It's only theoretical things. It's not Negel.
If it's Negel, then we have to try to understand it. I mean, that's really where I'm getting.
Sag mir wichtig to prove us du Gott. It's so me to prove us mit Magie zu gleich nach du Gott. You know. Oder McKen.
You know what I
mean?
It's still meta. It's still like the cover. It's like reading the cover of the book without, there's still the advertisement around the book.
You get to the point.
Exactly, and that's really hard. And what I think is that then, if we have to actually start caring about the actual, what the Rambam really cared about, because the Rambam didn't. The whole reason why the Rambam had sich gewagt zu sagen, as Aristotle's Chachmas are Master Barash is not because he was like people keep on getting to this love. Nicht weil gedacht hat, is going to say, it's the opposite. It's because he loved God so much and he wanted to understand so much. Like he says, Kabbalah is mich amre. It nicht gekehrt, dass es so is the best in the husband. He doesn't care who is the, and if it needs to be matched better with the religion, so we'll match it with Osfig and with Osgrud and all that. Plötzlich ist es nicht. But it's the opposite, because he only cared about the Teuchen and the Pneumias, the actual understanding that he let yourself, and all the people that are both sides that are fighting about Hata Yogeman, they're still stuck in the Kabbalist Emes mit Nein Mish Amre. So the Machloek Kabbalist Emes Mish Amre and I'm a Dove B'Shem Amre. Two contradictory ways of thinking, but they're still stuck in this Machloek. So, but the whole idea of this idea is that we don't know, and when people that actually do that, if you actually try to understand, the Yitzhak are going to stop caring, and it's also going to stop being some kind of So this is
The only one today,
it's because it's
the dignity van haar,
the basic answer is because to understand it, those learning the Fishet is an Rambam. So it's gonna take you 15 years to understand it, man. According to the Rambam himself, maybe today there's different ways, and that itself needs a bit of perish or a change. But it's a serious limit. It's not something that you sit in the back of those medrash and the Rambam would be an echta maskal, the maskinum from the this whole idea is very anyway.
What?
This whole machloikes, the Rambam would be a maskal is from the original maskilim. They came what they call themselves maskilim. They basically came up with this idea, and it's somewhat true, but it's not true that the Rambam would. It's only true in the sense that if you only care about understanding God, then of course you'll use whatever helps you to that. If maybe you shouldn't, maybe you should, but that's already aside. A much smaller Hakira than the Hakira. Does the Rambam say we should live in Berlin, or does he say we should live in Krukov? Man, that's not the point. It's totally, and that's why we get into this whole sidetrack. Like
today, Yogi Gang might have the Rambam really is the Gedalia now. Because he wasn't,
and the
amusing thing is that all the he wasn't against him the exact same thing. The same time in Rambam.
No, because he was the
no, it's a good thing for someone. And by the way, everyone I find it's a good thing for someone that maybe if you understand it, he's still the point was that he didn't care about these things. He tried to understand, and verstehen, yeah. So that's anyway. This is the house. Like so because of all of this, I tried to.
It's all the lishlo.
It's like outside of like how does it little to. So the kids are mass. So all this side that left trying it's problem also that's not concepts that I know, or even if you do know, it's like kind of line up in itself. It's not nicht zu gewöhnt zu dem. And es kann das die bessere concepts, which I'm also not zu gewöhnt zu. So it's not going to help me to say that, this is a lot of people, it's another lazy. Get them over it's not lazy. The Rambam gesagt, Aristo is outdated, although I don't know who said he's outdated. So let's learn the kashas on him and see if they're right. I don't know. Could still be that he was right. I don't know. Especially in metaphysics. In physics, look, diese Kararbeit, okay, it's nicht echt the noise. The noise is really the avuna from them, and there's actually in the academia there's actually people today that still think that Plato and Aristotle were right in metaphysics. It's nicht so green. A lot of and this is another weird thing that I find weird. Like all of the Chayudim says this on the type of place. So Kim and Kant, and it's ungefragt is okay. And it's like, it sounds like someone saying, Kim and the Kivai get ungefragt the Rambam. Okay. Then I want to hold that point, man. I don't see how this is like a very hilchasik story. Maybe it is. I'm not saying, but this is serious limit. This is something that takes actual work. Actual work. Nothing. All the things that they teach you in yeshiva, you still need. It's not going to help you.
The theoretical
doesn't make life easier. It makes life harder.
Theoretical science is zicher. I was just saying, they still use them. I mean, we still using the mathematics. We still use the mamish people most Later. Elusive. What's the name? Yeah, we use as a shade every day. We see still relevant.
Yeah,
Pythagorean theorem they're used today. Pythagorean theorem is today.
Yeah. But by the way, the Euclid's book actually is the hand to get the mamish hand to get mathematicians think that most of his proofs are wrong. Whatever. This itself is a limit. Like you literally could study 30 years to figure out they prove. But
I think it's like radically. It's not like they're science. It's not they're physical science. That they're radically like Dalgiasoidus and things like mamish.
Not so radical. Also physical. Exactly. This is the limit. This is something.
Or like Aristotle thought that the brain is just to keep the heat in the body. You know what I mean? The sponge.
The difference is about thing with what you want to call it, with knowing the physical though. And today they went like from concepts to figure out what's going on over here. Now they go, you have to prove everything that they work with.
This is auch ein bisschen, ja, das ist auch das Sache, was ich noch gleich noch sehr schnell. Because ich denke, Taka ist Aristotle, genau, wenn man schickt, neu nicht gekickt auf der Welt, nicht genau.
How do you say that lady only has 30?
It's not whatever, ich kann nicht an them. It's the guy, because when we talk about Chazal, but this is also not so much.
No, it's also much politics. Exactly.
I think this is
you know.
This is the Shahada that the Chloina science said on the Shloim. It's not clear that they were right. Understand? And that's not. It could be even whatever. I don't think that's. It could be that obviously the tennis is pushed. It takes a huge amount of time to figure out anything in this world. If you think about science, I know some real scientists mentioned. Arbeiten their job is in science. They don't know anything. What science meant in the Shiva meint, a science meint, aber nachdem was du 50.000 Menschen zum ausgefigert alles, und kann macht ein kleines Experiment, es nimmt 6 Geduschen, sie aufsetzen das Experiment. I'm not talking about and me can schreiben a paper was after macht it steps a bissel the swore to one way of understanding in a prat, and this is very serious work because you have to check everything 4 times to machen sich and you write up. It's extremely a lot of work. And then when you go to big questions, nobody knows. And then we're kind of in the same place as Aristotle was regarding big questions, like is there a God? Kind of science thing. It doesn't change much. More or less, a bit better. There's better logic, somewhat better. Just clearer the language, as in math, better symbol. Some things are a little better, but not much better. Still. Anyway, the kids. So therefore, it's very big. So number one, I made a tzimtzum that I'm not going to try to figure out, at least not this week. The reality. Was the Rambam getracht the reality, which is important both for Torah reasons, both for because he's a big authority, and for I think that at least to him, this is my basic Yisod I call him Minis Chacham. To him, it made sense, right? I can't say du Akasha, es kann sein, als the Kabbalim sagen, als es stimmt nicht. Okay, to him, what does gemacht sense? Let's at least get into his mind how it made sense to him, and then you get clear on okay, episodes in the sign doesn't change, episodes of Naya Akasha doesn't change, but at least first to him it made sense. So there's some theory here that it made sense to him. And I will try and understand the theory. Simon said the logic, the idea, which is very hard because there's few people that can explain it to you nowadays. Well, my answers like that. No, mechanics also impossible. And Simon said the Yiddishkeit, which is also very important. Okay, Atkan. So last week, and what I started with was as the Rambam had. And both in his Ikram and in his he said that later, which just seems to be the clearest, probably summary of what he thinks about this. This is Mershindik Bekitzer and Mershindik as we have Alliance and Moiris, and he's geschrieben mit Klur der Eyes, and he's geschrieben echt, but it's really what he thinks. I don't think he's lying. And Zion in Moira, where he does get into trying a bissel, but he is not where what's the philosophical anochas that he's coming from and so on, but he doesn't do a very good job of that. And he says himself that Moira is not for people that didn't read the philosophy. That land in this one was Edgeland, which is also not impossible to do, kind of thing. But at least was a tip was the Iker with the Sefer which as I showed here, it's also on your paper. If you look in if you look in this, you see that Perish Mishnayos and they say that more or less are word for word the same thing. In this first tick, in other words, the first halacha is the first halacha. There's some differences with that get when we come to the Pachasig. At least the first thing, in the first Ikra Gdura was Erif Gdura from Metzias Hashem, he literally says the same words. There's mamish chalikim from Werte from Oisius, so there's mamish selbe Sache to do as Ugdar. That's the first. Then we try to.
Shleim is the word that you speak on now.
So we have to. So there's 2 things I showed you on this. I had 2 charts here. That's why to clarify the 2 different, and then we have to make 3rd, 4th charts. And dann mal gesagt, trying to say was ich habe verstanden und was ich habe nicht verstanden. Was ich habe verstanden ist können also. So the Rambam by making a separate ikon, this is very important in Manavuna. I got to Lord half examine. By this defining, Rambam gesagt to do 2 mitzvahs, for example. By the mitzvah, so there's different. This is another very important thing to have cup. There's different And now there's different ways of organizing the Torah. So one of the ways is Tariq Mitzvahs. Stimmt Sefer Mitzvahs as I bedomme to Sefer Hayat. Wir können ausführen, muss alle Mitzvahs ändern. Das ist befähigt in der Sefer Mitzvah. Like the Sefer Mitzvahs is somewhat like his
outline.
It's like an outline, yeah, but it doesn't go the same order. It's very weird that the order changes, but nobody understands that yet. So Sefer Mitzvahs, the side of the mitzvahs don't seem to make
sense. He tried to make it on top.
But
David Cohen is busy with it. But David Cohen has a whole thing to figure it out. I'm gonna be whatever.
It could be just like a draft. Maybe they change his mind.
Schlanger. I remember. I still say that once.
It goes on that.
It goes with the tiny.
There's that's a third way. Exactly. And Moed Gimel is a third way, which more or less is the 14th.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Very good. I could always. I read a chart.
Could be. But because I'm just saying that's like his outline, and then but anyway, this is ein Weg von organizing Sachen, andere with the mitzvahs. Now, in zweite Weg, which is relevant here, is that he made a list of 13 ikrim, and this is there's like ganz machloikes geli batlamas, the 13 ikrim say in one more place, which is Hilchos Shiva Parig Gimel. He doesn't call them 13, and it's slightly different 13 because he took out Chava and Shvedish.
Well, and
added Torah, but it's still 13, so they're like the number 13, but he stayed around which ones they were. But it's still, that's the only place, that's the other place where we put this side of Tarig of the Ikrim, and it's important to notice that's the only place. And the Sefer Hayat, the Ikr is based on the side of mitzvahs. And the side of mitzvahs, so if you see the relation between these two things, so in Ikrim, that's only the first 4, maybe 5 Ikrim are relevant to our Sigin. The first Ikr is Metzias Hashem. And the second one is called Yichud Hashem. Agdas Hashem. The third one is called Shine and Gift. Fifth one is Isra V'Dezura, basically. However, exactly the Ram termed it. Now in.
He said 4.
So it's only 4. The fifth one is really. What's
the fourth one?
Very not clear why it's a Ikr B'chal.
What do you call the fourth one?
Betzias Agdas. The fourth ikr is, I forgot, the fourth ikr is Kadmas, Sherishan, Sheirishon, which is a great problem with the mind that at least does, yeah. So the fourth one is Kadmas. The fifth one, let's skip for now. Nobody understands why it's even an ikr. It's a mitzvah, it's something that you do. It's not clear that it's something to know. The first one asked this, they don't understand. Maybe there's some there, but.
Well, what's so
another that inside the
yeah,
there's an ikr are things that you know or believe. There's not going to make life. However, it says that you shouldn't worship any mitzvah or whatever. It's not a minna. It's a ikr, so it depends how much sense ikr. The Rambam doesn't seem to be consistent with one sense of ikr. His list of ikrim have different senses. I don't think he's consistent with them. Some of them are ikr mitzvah, some could be. It's a wichtige mitzvah. And the Rambam definitely thinks Isra V'Dezura is a very wichtige mitzvah. But it's another bet, and in Sefer Hayat, you'll find the fifth ikr only in Hilchos V'Dezura, not in Hilchos, so that you will find. Right? That mitzvah, the mitzvah of Isra V'Dezura is Hilchos V'Dezura, and the first parak tries to explain how he understands it. But that's the
second parak is first. That's the fifth ikr. It's in the beginning of the second parak.
Yeah, Ikra V'Dezura Shlo La'aved Echad Nabdim. Yeah.
Right. When they make a mitzvah, they think it's serious.
Right. In other words, the side of mitzvah here doesn't correspond exactly to the side of Ikrim. You want to say it like that. And the only place where the Rambam, and that's what I'm saying, the only place the Rambam went more or less in the side of Ikrim is in Hilchos Shiva, where he discusses who is an Apikoides. So in other words, the nafkamina from this, one of the nafkaminas of Ikrim is like the question that I don't like to talk about, which is Hilchos Apikoides. Or really, if you look at Hilchos Shiva, it's more broadly construed as Hilchos Schal V'Einish, Hilchos Tzaddik Rusha, Beinani, and Extreme Rusha. That's the paradigm of Hilchos Shiva goes like this. And over there, the Rambam has 4 minim, and minim was his chiddush, that min meant Einus Glatnish, and the Ikr. It's a big difference in which level of Ikrim you are. And the Rambam said that min is only someone who doesn't believe in God, basically. Now, God has 4 different, has 5 minim, which are the 5 Ikrim. But it's still more or less that's Hilchos Minim, Hilchos anyone that doesn't believe in the other ones, that's not mefarish, but let's be that the Rambam holds that you're less bad than if you're kofir b'Torah is so schlecht. Yeah, I mean, the Gemara say much. I mean, and he made it chilikim halacha also. Torah to make shenish only works. Kofir b'Torah, not after me. Anyways, that's that side. So now, and if you go okay, was ich will, this is noch nicht Ecke. Was ich will umkommen is that in this thing of, so firstly in this thing is very important. So Rambam separated Mitzias Hashem, knowing God from everything else. And Le'oid, and should be Tachzei separated. This is the we are getting to. The Tachzei separated, so in the Ikrim we made it into 4 or 5 different Ikrim. In other words, the Shaykh, the Zan, Amam, and Noren, it must be Shaykh, otherwise it wouldn't be separated. Maybe it's not logical, but you can make a mistake. Kann sein, einer was bleibt nicht in der dritte Ikrim, bleibt ja in der erste. Es kann sicher sein, einer was bleibt nicht in der vierte Ikrim, bleibt nur in der erste, if you understand the vierte Ikrim, mich für das Schweiler.
It could be that way if you're understanding, if you're
again, maybe he's making a mistake. Could be there's making a mistake, but it's enough minute how important it is. It's really a different concept.
No, could you get the idea?
Yeah.
We're just saying the word. Saying the word.
Like the fourth ticket for sure. Like the first 3, the fourth is one of the most important ones. The first 3 I'm not sure, but I'm not sure, but because the Rambam, I'll tell you why. Because the Rambam's proofs. Because I'll tell you why. Because
he's proving it
only halfway, but the proof only works halfway. And the fact in the Hantige Mes Haskuma, most people that talk about proving God nowadays don't even pretend to prove the second one besides for the first one. And as a Mickey Abraham and people like him.
I think
more or less.
Even not even Achdus.
No, he doesn't. I'm sorry. He doesn't even pretend to prove Achdus. And he actually thinks that his proofs lead to more than one God, and he has to check why it's only one.
Because each proof is something else.
So
here, so at the end of the day,
we'll
talk about that. Yeah, okay.
And es ist nicht so klar. This is the Sache, was man darf lernen. Ich weiß nicht, for some reason. Okay, let me reden für the proof. Ich will können echt die gesagt, the more important thing, maybe the most boilertige place we can see it, das ich habe geschworen. But the Rambam hat gesagt, als der erste Ecke, and he called that the Ecke Ragulish, I called it the erste Ecke. Right? Before talking about Achdus, and if you read Yesod HaTorah, that's why it's very meferish here. Yesod HaTorah by the Kala Shtayt. So they said this lie, the first 4 halachas are basically the first Eke. The idea is there was a mitzvah, so that's why I'm showing you. It's also a different mitzvah. That's another way to show you. So the Rambam has one mitzvah, Noich Hashem Lekeichel, which is very hard. It's kind of weird how he made that wisdom into a mitzvah. The Rambam himself understood that it's weird, and in Zahar Mitzvah he brought a proof to it from a Gemara, and because the Gemara counts on a mitzvah over there. But he understood that it's not a pusik of a mitzvah. He made it into a mitzvah, but it's a separate mitzvah from Shema Yisrael, which is the Rambam, the mitzvah of Ach Hashem, and the Rambam in mitzvahs Ach Hashem like the Rambam around the andere zwei. So if I give the Rishon, he doesn't actually say that. But the other doesn't say. It says the word Rishon, mitzvah Rishon, besides that it doesn't say at all. Chiddush doesn't say that at all.
And what?
Chiddush Olam doesn't say according to Sefer Yad and according to Cheshiva. But that's even more controversial. You could be a kosher Jew without knowing about Chiddush Olam. And nicht nur das, steht nicht the word Beure. And the whole Parik Aleph Yesod HaTorah, which is by Yesod HaTorah, because Parik Beis already have here, which is Mas Bereich Mas Mekov. It doesn't say the word Beure. It says Mutzi, and he's very, very clear about it. He does sometimes use the word Beure for what he calls this, but there's that mind on which way the meaning flows, right? Does Beure mean this, or does this mean Beure? But the first is, so Rambam made 2 mitzvahs. This is a clearer way to show. There's the first mitzvah, Noichi, and we discussed how the opposite of that mitzvah is the Zurus, is La'ilechu. That's weird, but not doing that. But the first mitzvah is Noichi, and that's Midias Tuvazer, Hamutzi Erishim, whatever it means. And then the second mitzvah is, if you continue, I don't have it here, that's why I have other things. If you continue on the Rambam, you'll see the second mitzvah is, the second mitzvah is Ach Hashem. Afterwards, it says, Amutzi Azeh Eichadi. That's basically not the right version, but and in Halacha Zayin it says Ali Azeh Eichadi Vayne Yisrael, blah blah blah, and then you end up, and then he says it's also eine gift. That's Halacha Ches. The numbers are very bad. So, but right. Then in other words, and then he goes in the rest of the parak is trying to defend from the psikim that seemingly is a gift. But all these, what I'm saying is there's two different distinct ideas. Two ideas over there, sheyesh mitzias Hashem, and then this guy, this mutzi, this thing that you know that exists, that's the business. There's eine gift that is another mitzvah called Achdus Hashem, and it's also in the Sefer Mitzvahs. The first two mitzvahs, Achdus Hashem, Achdus. That's two very distinct things. And you could ask, like you're asking, doesn't make sense to separate them, but of course that's going to depend on what your concept of Mitzvahs Hashem is. Not about it, but at least in the at least in the definition, in the Eshta definition. Du as a was heißt Mitzvahs Hashem, and this is a größer chiddush from the Rambam, this separation, because most people, like if you think about it, most people not only don't they separate the Mitzvahs Hashem and Achdus Hashem, they also don't separate the Mitzvahs Hashem and Kiyama Mitzvahs almost, or Mitzvahs Hashem and Yitzias Mitzrayim. Like the Pusik actually that the Rambam brings doesn't really say Yenoch Hashem like Mutzi Mitzvahs Nifshet. It just it goes on to say Hashem Tzazich Hashem Mitzrayim, right? Obviously, it's not a simple chat like Pusik. And if you ask a normal Jew, and it's very important, because if you ask a normal Jew, like the Kizri's famous question based on that, but even the Kizri is not nifshet enough for the Rambam, because the Kizri's question, right? That said, but the Rambam goes even a step before Hashem because it doesn't even have Boira. Boira is maybe the fourth thicker, which doesn't say anything like that. But the Rambam doesn't, when he talk about Metzias, he doesn't even want, and I showed you, that's why I showed, he doesn't even say Metzias HaBoira. Because Boira should see feel gesagt. Now, maybe because he's specific wegen Boira, it's not clear what Boira would mean. It could be because of that, but even without that controversy, this is actually politics. Is the Rambam echt gleich, was it the Rambam echt gehalten, wenn ich das schon ein bisschen rechiles. Who cares what the Rambam really thought? But what he really defined with Mitzvahs Hashem, this is for sure true, but he defined it prior to the concept of Boira, and sometimes he wasn't so careful about it. That's what I was showing here. You see the definition, this is, I call it Keteretek, but it's really like the title. That's why I'm medayik to call it the title. Because if you see the title of the Iker, so you could see him having different ways of calling it. So in the Ikrim, it actually says Metzias HaBoira. Actually, the only time here, the first, I don't know, it doesn't have page numbers. At the top of the page where the word back says.
The second Pekal.
Yeah, so in the Ikrim, it's actually his title, like it's Ikr Harish Metzias HaBoira. It does say the word Boira, but actually that's only 1 out of 4. So there's 4 places where he has this. I don't even quote modern because it doesn't just kind of order. But in all of them, he doesn't say the word Boira. So
and that's also that's the type. That's he said in Arabic. It's like that too.
So ich weiß nicht. Ich kenne nicht Arabic, but I'm assuming that whoever this is the Handige translation from Abshilat, I think.
I've learned Arabic.
Not enough to learn. Not enough to learn. I have friends that did that. I cannot understand. True. You don't even have to know Arabic. You just look that word and compare it. But I'm gonna assume that whoever translated it had verstanden wenn es wohl gestanden Metzias something ha'ayla, they would write ha'ayla. I'm assuming could be it's not accurate, but it definitely there was, I thought there was another place where he uses the word but maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm look here. So that's one place, but actually, the other places, even Sefer HaMitzvahs, he says Emina Solehis, and the same thing in Mishnah Torah and Hilchos Shiva, where he doesn't say Sha'ain Sham Boira, he says Sha'ain Sham Eli'ah, whatever that means, but it's not the word Boira. And like one of the people trying to prove that the Rambam didn't like Chiddush Olam said that the Rambam in his whole Moira used the word Boira 14 times, like out of expected 500. I don't know if the number is accurate or whatever. And he goes through each of them and he says in each of them you could show that it doesn't mean, but that's I'm just saying that it's true. Yeah, I'm just that's a good deal. But Lamasi, he never went under the Vete. This is why this is a big confusion. Under Vete, if you ask someone who is God, he says the Bashef, Litvaks like saying Boira Olam. Just a language from the Ramchal or something. I don't know.
No.
Where's
the whole thing about it. No, that the Chaskas say, why is it a good way of talking?
I didn't know.
The Heitiger Beruch.
I don't know. I think that where he wanted to say something that's not B'shigger. He wanted to say, he was like a Muslim to get the hair. Yeah, he was a Muslim. He wanted to say something.
You have to check this. The other Balamas, how they spell it. I thought it comes from the Ramchal or something. That's what someone told me, but maybe it's not.
How's the Ramchal say?
I don't know. This is one of the.
How's the Ramchal say?
I don't know why I thought that. The Yiddish way to say Rabbanu Shalom.
No, the Eibishter.
No, the Eibishter.
Most of the said the Eibishter or the Rebbeinu. In Briskat, they say Rebbeinu. He said they did the Rebbeinu. Yeah, they still like, how do they call that? You know,
this is one of my big hakiras.
How do they call the Eibishter? Like
Shemus, contemporary names of God. I'm going to write an article.
Yeah, no, yeah.
I read
that's like a lot of people don't know Yiddish.
Yeah, but this is not a natural. The theory of Ruchman says
you know what should
happen?
You know what should happen?
It sounds weird. But it's like a definition. What is
you know what should happen?
No, he doesn't mean that. I made this.
Yeah, so he writes about all these things about all types of Arim and Arim, right? So he says Hakadosh. He's good, yeah. He says like the Shtetli said the Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's not true. He doesn't know. He doesn't know.
It depends which Shtetl. Some Shtetl.
Nobody said Kodesh Baruch Hu.
In Hungary they did.
Kodesh Baruch Hu. Kodesh Buruchi. Kodesh Baruchi. The Eibishter.
No, in Hungary, a lot of there's a tradition saying everything has Shah. Ich try to doch kind of du haben so das so mit Baruch.
Yeah, when they talk about him, when they talk to him, he's a bunch of little.
Yeah, that's what Talmud tells.
Oh, the measure.
Oh, when they took the bunch of
Talmud tells whole series of shirim about this.
Yeah.
Pieces out Machshavas Chazal, very nice. And
he took about him the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and took two in the bunch.
And he says this thought. He says he goes through. He says this is a Chiddush from Orbach already. Chazal have new names. From Chadash Geshaimes. Like Hamokim, like Hakadosh Baruch Hu, like there's a few more.
Hakadosh Baruch Hu, take over the way you say that, right?
It's based on Sikkim Hakadosh Baruch Hu.
No, Hakadosh Baruch Hu, it's just like a Kaddish and Baruch, like a Kaddish and Baruch.
Right.
It's a new thing. It's a new thing for Golas. Where does the world stand on the Mikdash? After the Mikdash, stand on Kaddish the Sidra. It's a key on Kaddish the Sidra. This Hakadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah, I don't heard this from Moshe Shapiro. Yeah, I got Moshe Shapiro said that
because of Yishaya and Cheskel.
Yeah, no, it's more than Yishaya Cheskel. Also, Kaddish, it's Dafka and Golas.
So but anyway, he says this that then when they talk about him, they usually say, but they have different words. When they talk about the Torah, they usually say Pia there's Rachmana. So the Torah is Rachman and Gvira. We're not sure which. Rachmana means the Torah says. It's not a way of saying the Torah says. Rachmana Mashet and Torah.
Oh, but it really means Irish.
Everything means Irish.
Yeah.
Like Kippur would say in different spheres. Okay. The kids nach the 90. So yeah, this is very important because the Rambam was very exact when he said these kind of things. When he wanted to talk about, he didn't say the Rebbeinu Shalom, and he didn't say the Pashefa even. And although he could something, that's why I say I think that when he said Mitzvah Sabari, he doesn't mean that definition. Just that's how you would call him. He could have said Allah. I think the Rambam usually said Allah in day-to-day life.
Oh.
But
what's the definition of that? In
Allah is God.
They had the same.
Arabs have a definition. It's not like I always
No, but the same shortage of El. It's the Semitic language. They have the same. Like,
but Arabs don't have a name. Don't have a name for God.
There's 99. There's 99 names. I want to add the list.
Who? The Arabs?
Yeah.
I thought they don't have a name.
God, there's 99 names.
Because somebody said that they don't.
Even there, Bismillah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Allah is the Shema Etzem. The closest to Shema Etzem.
We talk about him very mifshit.
Yeah. Okay. This is we'll get to all of this.
Yeah.
They say that there's 99 names. One of them is the truth, the law, the good, a lot of nice names. The Sufis even like say it.
Sufis is okay.
No, but it's the Messiah. And also Yiddish Messiah. The Shivim Shaimas.
The Sufis are still around?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, you have that? Quite Sufis. Yeah. But those are changed. Much more normal today.
The ones in New York are obviously not the greatest Messiah traditional. They're not.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Okay, kids.
Okay.
Weitergegangen. Oh, so this is very important. So the Rambam was very important. So it's like he literally, if you really said that Torah, you mamish seem at a loss for words to say the least he could say without saying nothing. Because leider sheyesh mutzirish and then ich see the book that learns it doesn't know what's going on. So dua exists. So dua zachos mutzir, and nobody knows sham. We already figured out that just means is. But is dua do. That's what it says. It doesn't have a word for it because he doesn't want to give you a word for it because the first dhikr is, and if you got this, I'll show you in Moed, it's very clear about this. He only wants to talk about him at least in the first dhikr. Then even when he talks about after, we have to be ma'ayin what exactly that means. But it's very important to him that the existence. This is the salvation, the first thing that's true to me. Matthias and alles andere will be Now the question is what happened with the other thing. So this is really the question. So there's now they at kind of zichram. Yes, there's the shale of what's the detachment, what's the reason for this? What is going on actually here? So what's going on is a few things. What's going on is a few things. Couldn't call the erste Sache is guide to is that the Rambam has a definition for when he says Mitzvah, and he goes on in Aluch Aleph to give that definition, right? The definition is something called Mechiv HaMetzias, which is what a word made up by Avicenna, and ich weiß, die definition verstehe ich. Mein mehr weinige necessary, existent in English. Existent, right? A thing that exists necessarily. Mechuyav HaMetziut means non-necessary. In Arabic, it's I forgot the words. In Arabic, but the necessary of existence. That's the most literal translation of Mechuyav HaMetziut. Yeah, in other words, that his the logic is the push and the Rambam likes it up like this, but it's the push that everything else that exists. So there's different kinds of existence. This is the big finish. In other words, there's not only to exist and to not exist. This John mentioned also the mind Shakespeare. Ja, man kann nicht nur sein oder nicht sein. Es noch zwei Wegen von sein. Right? That's the big chiddush. It was a chiddush from Aristotle, but Avicenna applied it to God in this way. This is actually the Rambam sucht in Moirach Heilig that this is the Gebot of Aristotle, but all the Mefarshim say that. It means to say that it's herausgenommen from that.
The concept of being mechiv, that's the old thing, the logical thing. That's a logical thing, right? Like one person is mechiv to be true, right?
It's history of thought, so you know where it comes from. That's important. So
that something can't be and not be at the same time.
So basically, but this is a good way of putting it. The Rambam himself seems to put it like this. We can nicht know it. In other words, when we ask if God exists, so one way is to just talk about does it or does it not exist. We're going two options, but really there's three options. Really, in other words, technically there's four options according to Avicenna's weird calculation. In other words, you could either because each one of these exists and not exist, which is this what he calls efshari, possible in English, but usually how they give philosophers say contingent, or is it mechiv? Is it hekdechi? Is it necessary? Necessary means that we cannot, and the modern way of saying it, that there's no universe in which it would not be true. You cannot imagine. Another way of saying it, you cannot imagine a reality in which this is not true. In other words, like logical necessity is the biggest, which is the example for this. The push the example for this is as to sagen, as the Tisch is square. Ich kann doch gedenk vorstellen, a Tisch was nicht square. Ganz the emphasis is the Tisch is square. Nicht square, so that but the Tisch has had vier Ecken. This is, it's true. It's true. Okay, it's true, but it's very easy to imagine another table that's not, and you can look at the next table and you see that it's more round, and you can definitely imagine a universe in which this is better definition, more clear definition. Masha Einkein, a square table that's also round at the same time, this is impossible, right? That's it's impossible. I cannot imagine any universe in which that would be true. That's at least the assumption. We can, at least the ins and outs, can imagine a little distancing. If we're going to go with this gets into the whole question of numbers and stuff, but that we go with this definition. And so therefore, by something both not existence and not existence could be either necessarily. So just like in contradiction, something that cannot be true. Contradiction is the biggest logical stigma for them. This is what's called the Chakastira, the law of non-contradiction. And the same thing, there's the opposite of that, right? So, for example, what we call in logic the law of identity. This as the Tish is the Tish. There's no world in that which that can't be true, which is kind of simple, but it's just important to define. So that way you have something that necessarily exists, right? Or
that was the law of identity is where? So logic,
that things are identical to A is A. That's how they say in logic. A is A. Good. Aber viel. Mehr von dem schon nicht möchte. Aber viel ist nicht, because A is A. X is X. This is the law of things that are identical to themselves. Because if they could not be identical to themselves, then logic would fall apart. Things are identical to themselves. In other words, you can't be you and not you at the same time. That would be the Yotzim.
That's
logically.
That's really the law of contradiction.
Right, but we need this for that to work.
Right.
Because other words, that you could be you and not you at the same time, then there would be no contradictions either. This is necessarily true. There's no world in which you could not be yourself. Nicht you, because you is very complex thing. Let's read the logical you. Yeah, the Muslim. And now, therefore, so this is about statements. This is what the modern people would tell you. Right. This is about statements. So some statements, some sentences are necessarily true. And some.
You know what I mean? What they call it? They don't call it a sentence. They call it no, that's a different word. You know what I mean? It always comes with one apostrophe. Okay. No.
Okay, some statements are necessarily true. Some things are necessarily not true. Right? A is impossible to be true. A is impossible to not be true. So it's necessarily true. And some like most the rest of the world is in between these two extremes, right? It could be that right now it is true. So this gets us into weird games, but right now it is true, but it's not. That's also
nothing.
That's why I've said that it gets weird, but that's not really true in the modern way of thinking. That doesn't really make sense. Because the halt is necessary. Can the halt anders? Yet is it's weird. It becomes weird when you talk like that. You could play this. It doesn't really make sense to say that. Nachman also plays with that, but it doesn't make sense. And this is Avicenna played with that, but it doesn't really make sense.
That's who wrote it.
This is the most of the, in other words, the reality, anything they have to check in reality is going to be one, not these two extremes. Okay, so therefore, when the red thing, God exists or does not exist, so we really have to talk about two levels of existence. That was the Vod is. Yes, when the Rams of God exist, what he means to say, and this is what he means to say when he says Mutzidish, and this is important, is that he means to say Nishtad exists. That's according to then he could have stopped but that's still not a God. A lot of things exist. Say exist, that's the problem, because we have to say God exists. What exists? What exists? Yeah, let's forget about the Rishon for a second, but I'm talking about this relevant to the next three paragraphs, right? Which are in the same halacha. Important to note, because in the old Rambam they made it into 4 different halachas and you lose the whole idea. Okay. Right? So now this is problematic, because if you would have already had a definition for God, and you say God exists, God, the creator exists, okay, so that would be a coherent sentence. But Laida Shesham Mutzi doesn't tell us anything. Obviously something exists, otherwise it wouldn't be talking. Right? When we say a God exists, this Mutzi that he's trying to talk about is God. What do you mean by that? What's exist? Say exist. What's exist? So the Chiddush, what the Rambam goes on to define it, and he says what exist is epis what exist in a nichrichtige way, mechiyevdige way, in a necessary way. That is what I mean to say when I say God exists. There exists a necessary existence. And they got defined what's my necessary existence, and he literally skipped the Himam Tziklan Imtzu, because most people are going to misread it. That's talking about Bria, and it's not talking about Bria.
But why doesn't he say it? It says Mutzidish.
Now, the Im Yala Ala Das. Let's skip this a minute, because we have to read it in the right way. Im Yala Ala Das, was meine ich zu sagen, als Mutzi? Meine ich zu sagen, als nicht, als exists so wie alle andere Sachen. Im Yala Ala Das, eine Mutzi, ein Dover Ich, in other words, there's no possible universe in which he does not exist and anything else exists. Same thing verkehrt. If there would be nothing else, he would still be. Right? In other words, there's no possible universe in which he doesn't exist. Right? You could imagine nothing existing, but the necessary existing must exist. Well, the necessary. We cannot imagine Sachen, was exist nicht, was can nicht exist. Can nicht exist. And it must always exist. In other words, God can exist without the world. The world cannot exist without God. Actually, nothing. The world is a very bad word. Nothing can exist without the necessary existence. Kimtos, this is already a kimtos, and this really goes back to kimtos is everything else. Now, this is the next step, really. Now, so this is the definition of Metzias. In other words, without relation to anything else. When we look at Mutzi, in mind, unnecessary existence. Mutzi Rishon, maybe that's the word, patch of the word Mutzi, but I feel this about the Mizos is necessary existence, and they call it later Mutzi Emes and Alucha Bayis. That's what God is. Now get Kim Nachazach. Now, in other words, imagine there would be no people, there would be no universe. Well, the Chaldige can't sound the erste Ikke, right? It's not so all can't sound mid the Chaldige, otherwise it wouldn't be the Ikke. Right? So we don't need anything to exist for God's existence. And same thing, we don't need anything to exist to understand God's existence or to believe God's existence, right? God's existence is nicht tuli, is nicht possible, is impossible for nicht sein. Darf ich nicht dich gut nicht sagen, wenn ich sage dich mit Jesus Hashem, darf ich nicht sagen, gut nicht wegen anything anderes. This sounds kind of obvious, right? Okay. Therefore, l'chore the erste Stekel, wie Mamze call him to him, is not really relevant to the actual definition of Metzias. It's relevant to something else. What is relevancy? Relevant to the relationship and they necessary existence, alle andere Sachen. Because we don't live in the world where nothing else exists, only God, unless you're in the Babacha. But most people don't. Then, and even that is no, that's not mine, but this is a joke. Because we don't live in that world, so when I talk to you about God, I'm going to right away have to show you what the relation with this and that. And is something like this. That it's true. It's true that we know that God can exist without anything else existing. That's kind of the definition of existence. And if God would die, would stop existing, when the world stops existing, then schwache God. This versteht jeder nach Lauf Pshat, but sicher wenn man kann es doch noch hier anziehen. Aber es wird nicht gewiss wegen dem. This is very important. We would not know about it, not only because we would not exist. If what? If there would be not, if let's see, in Yalla Ladas, I call him Lama miles on a Ladas days, okay? Imagine that nothing else exists, only God exists. Right. Okay. That's totally coherent. That's true. Okay. But nobody would know about it. Not only because nobody would exist, but we wouldn't have no way of knowing that it must exist. Because this is weird. The Rambam in his Mekapel, his proof where they exist is into this way of this defining it. This is my guy also on Lech Gimel. He keeps on doing this because the Rambam wants to write a proof. But then beim weißen meint nicht wissen nur ein Proof ist beim gemacht nicht wert gar nicht. At least with the simplistic, nicht elaborate, it's nicht richtig. Ich sage, der Proof, what that, but they darf es sagen mit der Proof. Und andere Werte, wenn ich sage, ich habe Schmitz Risch, ich kann nicht sagen, es exists. It exists by itself, because then nobody would know, then you would not know about it. Raya. This is the Raya. This is really everything as Raya.
What do you know about it? What do you know about it?
Well, it's the most wichtig von der Rambam. Das ist mir gesagt. Es ist wichtig von der Rambam, als zu schreiben, wenn geht schreiben, da Luch, as God exists, he's going to write the proof. Because of the Rambam, knowing something without knowing the proof is more or less not considered knowing anything.
No, we don't know it.
You could say, but you can't know. The Rambam very clear.
There's two things. I know. You're saying two things. One thing is that the proof of God is that Asa Duabel. Another thing is that it's important to write it because
right. That's why. That's just being machriach. That when you read the halacha, you have to find where the proof is also. Because if it wouldn't have the proof, and only the definition, the Rambam would be very not happy with himself. And there's this beferish a few times. And on Gerrit Christmas, my Philip geschrieben, Seifriat, dass jeder einer kann verstehen und alles. Aber geschrieben bezira achik zur the proof of it. So otherwise he doesn't call that knowing really. Even knowing mit doch Kabul gelernt trust in the Rambam, the halt der weiß dass du mich hier siehst, it's kind of he has to put in the proof. I don't know. There's two reasons. It's ein bisschen besser, dem F ist besser wegen des Zusammenhang. Now Kapuna, let's go stick with the first thing like you said. So wie ist fast? In other words, if you read Murray, you'll see whatsoever son is proof for God existing. The proof is things exist. Right? And since things exist, and kann ich reingehen in der Riches von der Proof, aber das soll ich verstehen nicht mehr, aber können wir sagen klar. If anything exists, and we know that those things are not necessary, at least the things that we know about, du hast auch ein Mittelweg, was man wirklich kennt. Aber die Sache was in sehen, all of them, or most of them, or all of them actually, don't seem to be necessary. Diese Weisheit has nicht necessary, because they actually sometimes stop existing. Right? And maybe for other reasons, but there's a simple way. You start talking about Kadam Zolim, this gets complicated.
Right.
But
not everything we know that stops existing.
So according to him,
theoretically,
according to Pyrik Bias, he talks about this. If they don't start, ich darf kicken the proof arbeit. But this is the next step. But it's arbeit at least it works from things existing. But if nothing would exist, we wouldn't have the proof. This is as if is a clue. Was it proof arbeit? That's something that's really next year. Noch zwei Dudes ausbringen. Is the proof arbeit and the Hassan himself says Ataritzim and Raf machen besser and the Rama made it. The Rama it takes him 3 pages to say the proof. So obviously it's nicht really simple wie Stab to do. But that episode exists. If nothing would exist, then nothing, at least besides for the problem that there wouldn't be anyone to think about it, it also wouldn't have a proof, theoretically. Well, the proof the proof, and like one literally, if you write down his proof in like modern form, it would say axiom, or we know things exist. Okay, things exist. Now these things, are they necessary or are they contingent? Since they're necessary, they're contingent according to him, and contingent things cannot exist by themselves, according to him. Mizanas do a necessary thing, was macht says on existence instead of not existence. That's the structure of the proof. And therefore, when I look, he has to include wie weiß this, was du a bunch of andere Sachen was existen. And is manzi alle andere Sachen was existen. In other words, this is not really his job. So don't read this as his job. It's not that the Mutzirish's job is to make everything else exist.
Definition.
It's the way we know about him. The proof, the proof from them is that alles anders exists. And alles anders exists, nicht von sich allein. Diese weiß has exists, nicht von sich allein. Let's bracket that out. Ich weiß nicht auf damit, aber ich weiß das. And kommt also sagen, for was exists sein? For why does anything exist? It exists because the necessary thing is the first thing in the chain, at least, that makes them exist. Right? And if you read, this is an important word, because if you read the Lucha Bais, you see that Amitas is a Rambam's code for necessarily.
So could have skipped who man's the content could have been skipped. Could have just straight to Chonim Tzayim and Ashman words. And then Amitas Mitzay.
It's Lucha is saying the same thing twice.
Yeah. So it's like this.
Lucha says the same thing twice. Darf man einwand, sie meint etwas anders. Chonim zum Ashman words ma benaim. Also, he adds in a bunch of big arichas.
You have to inside him. You have to inside the things. He's the mountain. Right. These things are
right, but that's why his definition is that he's making everything exist. Not he's making them. Right? He makes them exist because the default for possible things is that they should not exist.
Right.
Because nothing is forcing them to exist. Why do they exist? Because something necessary made them exist. Right. This is the touch. In other words, it's also big arichas, Neshamaim, Uretz, Mashabanayim. This is lafike common mistakes. You would have thought maybe the himmel is unnecessary, maybe the Uretz, maybe absent fish. In other words, well, every word here has a meaning, but that's just for other reasons. Mashabanayim means sichlim. That's what you could see here. And here, this is actually it's not the same order, but I could show it to you from Perish Mishnah. When it says the Chol Mash is Lusam and Sichlim, so this is not making an arrow because this shtickle, this shtickle here, the arichas, the sichlim and the stuff is actually changed a little order, but it's literally definitely the same thing. What he says here is what it says here. Right? And the reason for this is because there seems to still be a machlokes how exactly these but they change because there's according to their picture of reality there's this and then it's galgalim and then there's galgalim have sichlim in them or it's next to them or above them, and all of this together is als Afshuri, the like Avodah maybe, or the like even some Pshutim in Aristotle, which said that these are also necessary. So that's important. But this is Tam Arichas, nicht Legabe the Eitzim Agdura. But the Eitzim Agdura is.
What about ideas also? What's the number all about?
Seichel doesn't mean idea. Idea is not.
Okay,
it's a thing. It's a thing. I don't know what kind of thing, but it's a kind of thing. And his way of seeing.
It says it. He says it.
Yeah.
He says it is.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, he says that on Malachim.
Yeah, but Malachim don't have wings in the Rambam, you know.
Whatever. No, but that's Sichlian. That's called Sichlian.
Yeah. I know that.
That's Sichlian.
Yeah. So this is l'chayra this. So now.
You're supposed to be 2 years this summer.
Where?
When we were dating the Lamed.
No,
I think Sichlian.
What did they say Sichlian?
No.
Manas Scholim. I don't know. Yeah, probably Scholim. I don't know. In Arabic they don't have these anyways.
No.
Okay, so this is the Adkan is l'chayra Zichir.
No, that's what you said Seichel, no?
It is Seichel. What Seichel has to do with this?
It's a being.
Yeah, the being.
Is it more being than Seichel than ideas? I don't know. I'm not sure. It's very mifshatig beings. These. Ideas also have a being, according to Plato, right? I mean, whatever.
Those are nicht ideas, exactly. Nicht ideas in deinem Kopf, ideas in reality. That's the point.
Yeah, okay.
So Adkan is sicher jetzt, was man darf emesdik ausfiguren is sehr important. So now, hayotz lo nimezeh. So the first thing, that's the first thing. So we looked at the Rambam separated Metzias from everything else. So there's such a thing, which is enough. It could be a kosher Jew. And if it's kosher Jew. Kosher kasher is not the point. We can't it's enough. It's enough to think about this all day somehow. I don't know what exactly you're thinking. It's enough. Like it's the it's nothing. It's nothing to know is that there is. Now, when I say there is, now, what do I mean by separating this? So I said the first thing, what I mean by separating this is that God's definition is that He is in a certain different way of ising than other things, right? Because all the other things are, but they're not are in the same way as God, because they aren't passively, contingently. And God is necessarily. So this is showing this has a positive content in the Metzias. Metzias might not know as a gewöhnlich, when the Metzias hat das nicht kann meaning. Well, an normale Metzias hat auch nicht kann meaning. It's just the Sach was exists, but God nicht kann Shem Sach. No. So that's so the first thing here in this chilik, in this chiddush, that there's Metzias chitz and alles anders, is that Metzias meint etwas. It's a meaning though. And it's actually a very simple meaning. As long as you understand the modality, as long as you understand the difference between necessity and contingence, it totally makes sense. Because everyone talks about God being normal and I still don't know what exactly it's supposed to mean. Aber this is a ganz simple Sache zu verstehen. Andere wird ich bin nicht die so Sache. Maybe I don't have a good way of imagining that, but it makes total sense. It's just schwer zu verstehen.
Okay.
Can I just give you a whole sheet?
No.
Makes sense.
No,
I can even show you things like logic that are like that.
Like
that logic is just a statement. This is an existence, right? So
like what does it mean?
You can imagine.
No. Is there a real difference in the set? What does it mean? Something exists necessarily? Is it? Well, is there a real difference in something necessarily existing and
what do you mean? There's all the difference in the world. That's not necessary. What do you want to know?
What does necessarily mean? Usually, when we talk about things necessarily means that we never met. It's never not, basically. You know, this whole concept, this whole chiluk.
The concept the concept made. Do we mean about time? The connection of time to this is very interesting. A lot of things are. This is philosophy.
A lot hold this some words. I mean,
that's not true.
It's just words.
That's not true.
Necessary and this.
That's not true. That's not true. No modern logician thinks that necessity is a concept doesn't an inquiry concept. As a how man can prove necessary beings, because there's a very big difference between necessary statements and necessary
beings. Necessary beings. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
But they
necessary.
So let me say clear. This is a kasha. Deze was at the eerst can't zo deze als stissen. Deze maakt deze why should drama it's a very big question to me of Rambam because since we said over something to him for today. It's a big question if the Rambam really believes that we can't understand God. I think he believes that we could understand.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys have to what's your question? Why do you say you can't understand?
Yeah.
You can't even
That's another thing in the world.
Oh, you're asking what me.
Yeah. It's
That's what I was saying. It's the opposite. Everything else is hard to understand because it's complicated. Got it simple.
Yeah.
That's my God is the thing. God is the most simple thing, and that's why nobody understands it because it's too simple from the past. I don't know why.
This I didn't understand. This is, I mean,
but what is
the Rav Shalom Chaim?
That's 3 years.
Okay, but that's
it's not only him, but it's not mine. By the way, that's what we can't talk about.
But that's not Chaim's. But that's not Chaim's. What? It's Tzedek has the same shot. You just plagiarize the Tzedek. That literally is never Tzedek shot. This is a minute.
No.
No.
That's
no, it's I think it's
what? Finish it.
His son says that he learned murder with him, whatever. I don't know.
I know exactly what it was.
I think he says very simple. I think he's very simple.
No,
I think it's very simple. The fact is very simple. Push it. The Madrega of a soiber, we can't come. We don't come to it with cycle. With the but this never was not soiber. It's not that you don't come with that through that you need a minute.
No, but what does it mean? I'm not against him now.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not.
Well, you know, it's cholik to come the Alter Rebbe. It's not a kid.
No, now getting to politics.
No, it's not richtig up to him.
It's politics. It's
No, since the verstand. I put him in Chassidus.
I could put him.
According to Rambam, the way you meet God is with your seichel.
Yeah, this is sicher.
Yeah.
This is sicher that so it's true. In other words, this is a stickler aside, not because it seems to me that this concept is very simple, extremely simple, actually deceptively simple. As look this looks, the concept of necessity, the concept of existence. If you want to figure it out philosophically, there's books to be written and that were written about it. It's very nifshit because we don't really see existence as it's in itself and saying no Zachen must exist, which in other words say that they exist contingently. But think existence is you could say that the concept doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense. When it obviously makes sense. But it's a mifshit concept. It's a concept moed mifshit. And we talk about God as only talking about his existence. In other words, only talking about being necessary, which might be the same with Afkik and not exactly. It makes total sense. I don't see that there's something under the when you say that this is hard to understand because it's not. So I can understand when you say it's not simple to understand in the sense of, like you said, it's not time and place, or I don't know, it's not Gashmias, whatever that's supposed to mean. Because I still don't understand what Gashmias means. That's probably the hardest concept to understand. And children understand cops, but they don't understand God. In other words, they don't really have. But this is true. This is the Rambam would probably agree with this. The Rambam would definitely agree with this because he's very big on this. The Rambam very much thinks that most people don't have tools to have abstract thought. Since God's existence is an abstract thought, he talks about this fetish that for laymen, I mean simple-minded people, the more Gashmias, the more existence. The more things exist. He talks about it. Right, they're in their minds. I never know if the Rambam is just saying Lashon Hara about everyone over there. It's very hard to figure out.
What do you mean? What are you saying? What the children is in a cup?
But children, that's at least the idea. I don't think it's true. I don't think it's true. I think that children understand abstract.
I spoke to people like this. Like he took. I tried to explain to him.
I'm just assuming that everyone is stupid. Who knows that he talked with them?
I had him hold the key once with an adult, okay, and he was talking about Ganag and Hammond.
But adults are worse than children.
Ganag and Maluchim. I tried to explain to him, I don't think that I have Fliglich, I'm sorry, okay, it's just, and the guy tried to think, it was high, he called me like a Koifer, because if you don't, you're more Koifer, if they don't have Fliglich, then they don't exist, right, so you like, like, they exist more if they have Fliglich, right, if they have, if they're flapping it, right, the more sounds and the more.
Okay, so let me just, what I'm going to try to do is just organize those very important. So let's do as I thought. which is talking about abstract things. Most people have not have a lot of training in abstract thought, and therefore it's hard for them to conceptualize. I don't think it's actually hard to understand. I think that sometimes there are studies that claim that children understand abstract things.
Sometimes they have to,
because all children understand that their eye is not stuck in their body. Because if you say my body hurts me, my hand hurts me, your hand, obviously there's that chance in the right? This is a proof from children.
The what? When they say what?
When your kid comes and says, ich habe a boo-boo, man Kopf tut mich weh. So ask him, wer ist the Dach, was tut weh? Tut dich weh, yeah? Wer ist dich?
Right, so they have
Dich is an abstract entity.
Right.
It doesn't actually exist. Can't find it much. The autopsies of brain bots. Doesn't exist. It's a concept, right?
Yeah. Everything is a concept. Everything.
Well, it's a concept or abstract entity.
They're trying to talk that way. They're not conceptualizing what they're saying.
Okay, so it makes language works.
It's Bemivla, they believe in. Okay, but everything is like that. When you talk about something, when you talk about anything, it's like that. So when you talk about a head and about eyes, all these.
I'm just saying the way they talk.
Universal.
The way they talk shows it's like.
It's ingrained in us. Everything. Ideas are ingrained in us. Numbers are ingrained. What do you mean?
Our numbers. I think that
most
adults don't understand. You can't argue with that, but most adults still didn't understand the concept of numbers. Because most people think of math as adding together real things.
Right, but the
concepts are actually magic.
It's
actually something weird. Zwei Kopf Celsius and 1 mit 1 ist 2. So wie ist der 1 und der 1 gekommen? I know people that I know a person that literally became start to believe in God because of that, because he was wondering for so long. Ja, ich verstehe, ich habe einen Kopf, noch einen Kopf, but the 1, nicht der Kopf, verstehe, but the 1 became this, that must come from God, because otherwise it doesn't make sense.
It's not so crazy.
Nicht ganz so drei Teile, it's not crazy at all. Smart person.
This thing are universals. It's the concept of universals.
What was bothering? Two-ness. I don't know where oneness and two-ness comes from, or numbers. Because one cup, if I have one cup and I add another cup, then I have 2 cups.
Right.
But that concept is not only about cups. It's about ones and twos, or ones and ones, right?
That's that prove God.
It's nice.
I'm
not sure.
It's abstraction. If you're not
something going on that
it's not. You're not a material.
I don't understand how it proves.
I know, but you're really you're stepping out of materialism.
That we have
it's stepping out of materialism. You just one step out of materialism.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how it proves God. And that person became a Christian, so you asked me how it proves Jesus. The Hunch can miss.
Okay,
how it proves something. Okay.
If you replay, even whatever. Bertrand Russell, he talk about
the kid is not. So this is einfach. This is number 2. So now a lot of people that I asked this question last week told me your Terev, which is this new atheists like him and like other people that say that these just words that they don't really make any sense. They don't have any meaning. So this was in mind. I was looking for Spanish, but that's silly. No, you can't go around saying that when the believers talk about God not being understood, they mean to say that atheists don't believe in it. Leviticus 2 it doesn't exist because it makes no sense. But Leviticus 2c macht es ja sense because I believe in it when something doesn't make sense. So to his mind it doesn't make sense, but that's not a good way of saying L'malam and Adas. That his mind doesn't make sense. That's a very bad way of understanding.
I think once you accept it.
You're talking your question.
In the Rambam it made sense, this proof. It made sense. I sucht die eine zweite, ich weiß doch, das macht keinen sense.
No, you said it's a simple idea.
Very simple.
Yeah, I'm asking.
No, you could argue with the Kant. You could say the Kant is very simple.
I'm telling you, the Rambam makes sense. I'm just saying, you were saying it's a simple concept everyone agree with.
You can't go around
everyone understand what you're talking about. I said it could be an atheist. Say you're saying is meaningless. That's what I'm saying. Yeah,
of course you could say that, but it can't be that when the same person, the same believing people go around and saying that God is that they mean that the atheist thinks that it's meaningful.
Of course not. No, of course not. I didn't mean
that. You're trying to understand, someone who believes in God, why would he, according to the Rambam, why would he say L'malam Yadah?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I know people that say that.
And he's not saying L'malam Yadah. He's saying
it's not.
Yeah.
You're saying. Yeah, I was just saying. Actually, you're saying it's a simple concept. Say Shulkin. They don't
cholik that it's simple. They don't cholik that it's fakir. Russell and Mushel Zok, that the logical proof, which is very similar to this, is extremely convincing. It just thinks that it's wrong. Exactly. Yeah, so I know people not only the Chaim that say this, people not before him and more serious than him in theology that say this kind of words. I don't know what exactly they mean. The Ramak says this a lot of times. And he talks about he even uses the concept of Mechir HaMetzias. It seems to me that he doesn't understand what Mechir HaMetzias means, so I'm not sure. I'm not that problematic. Because this is some.
What's his law? He says the Mailam, I doesn't use that word.
No, but he uses the words of not being understood. I'll show you Aflin and the Rashi, but we'll get to that. But he uses those kind of words in general. Okay, we have to how that works. But it could be a whole lot of because we couldn't have all different. They work with these concepts and they have a different way of conceptualizing it, and I don't know. I have to at least get clear on it. What's the discussion?
He is going with Mechir HaMetzias. He's trying to.
Yeah. But the Mekabulim claim, the big claim of the Ramak, a lot of Mekabulim is that since Mechir HaMetzias isn't possible to understand, as they say, they take the Rambam to be saying because this is part of his whole Shlidus Adam and everything, and therefore that's not enough for them because they want God to be understood. And because God Himself wants to be understood, so He created as a spirit, by which He's understood. That's what it says, and that's the Ramak's more or less structure of argument. And I'm looking at him and I don't understand what he's saying because the spirit I don't understand, but Mechir HaMetzias is very simple. Very easy to understand.
It's not only a Shliva. It's not only a Shliva.
Right. They're mad at God, at a God that you can't understand. It's opposite, by the way. And if anyone tells you the Kabbalah believe that God is Lamal Nadah, it seems like a Kabbalah even much more radical way than the Rambam believes that God is understandable. Nishman is understandable. He made himself understandable.
They don't have something to relate to. They don't have something to relate
to. Okay, so it looks like you want a God that has like a teddy bear. This is the Qur'an, and it's not good enough. He wants it to be philosophical. You could say,
what do you teddy bear? Not good comfort.
I don't know. So what? Why can't you relate to Mechir HaMetzias? It makes total sense.
No, it's not within your concept. That's what I mean. Not teddy bear.
No, man. It's like the main thing is like now.
No. He says like this. Mechir HaMetzias versteht man nicht. But Sfira Zachat man versteht man because you know more or less what wisdom is. Let's say it's not exactly accurate, but you know what wisdom is. But now that God is also wisdom, we understand him better than when we said he just exists. Which is only halfway as true.
It doesn't mean
the Rambam would say the opposite. I understand Mechir HaMetzias and I don't understand wisdom because wisdom is just love mind.
It doesn't mean because of Mechir HaMetzias is like Shail.
It is Shail, no. And what's the problem with that?
So therefore you're
saying that's a different point. That therefore he doesn't really have midas and doesn't really have. But that's not easy. He also talks about understanding. He says that it's Sinish Mirn. It doesn't have a name, for example, and he wants God to have a name. And this is a big machlokes. So according to the Rambam, and this according to the Rambam, the Shem Havai means Mechir HaMetzias, and according to him, it doesn't mean Mechir HaMetzias because Mechir HaMetzias has no name. It means Sviras Hatfeis or whatever.
Come on, this is the
that
should be understandable.
It should be understandable, and most people read this wrong because they don't have the concept of Mechir HaMetzias, but it more or less makes sense. Okay, so yeah,
later. Okay. Says later.
Yeah,
something to know.
But it's somewhat the
experience.
That could be because you never experienced something like that. Maybe there's machlokes of das means things that you experienced or things that you can conceptualize. No, could be. You could say that some atheists say that a lot of you could say like some atheists say that anything you don't experience, you don't really know. You could just talk about it, just playing with words, and therefore you need to experience God. And this in some weird upside down way, a lot of machlokes in theology is really about how much you agree with atheists. Okay, the kid so that yet nachlenani. So now the second thing that we have to understand. So this azifil v'shtayich as the Rambam zok metzias and anything else. It means that there's a definition called Mechir HaMetzias, which is something real, something important, and this is really what we mean by God. Now we said now a second thing. That's one thing we said. Now a second thing, which is the way we know about Mechir HaMetzias is because other things exist, right? So. And in other words, that's the proof. And that's also what makes the concept make sense to us when something makes sense on them. But that's how we know about it. So yeah, we have to really think how this is the big question, and I think this is the real interesting part when we talk about Chiddush Olam and all of this. There's two more things that I need to understand. One is to actually understand this proof, and the Rambam wrote a whole Paidik for us to understand it. So maybe we should try to learn it and understand it. And the second thing is to understand how this is going to actually relate to the word Boira. Or in how much it can be differentiated. So there's another word here that we skipped, which is the word rishon.
Right.
And what does rishon mean here? What's meant this mutzi rishon? The first relevant to what? Well, the first in what? The first it actually doesn't say in that language. And it's interesting. Why doesn't it say? This is the Chayre Emes, but not
say where?
The meaning. In Perish Mishnayos, it doesn't say the word
right,
rishon in the first ticket because he has a separate ticket that says that. And then you said that he just skipped that whole Eke. He didn't say it at all. He just said one word, Mutzi Rishon. That's the Pshat. But now what we do have to understand is how much of this is connected to the concept of blood. In other words, this is Zicher, and this seems to be very important and seems to be very connected to this, but I don't understand this fully. This is Zicher that the Rambam, there is a person, this is the Rambam, this is someone else, so do as Amin Mensch that believes in Mechiva Metzias. Actually, that person's name is Avicenna, because that's what he believes. And he believes in Mechiva Metzias, and he does not believe in Bria Soilam. In other words, doesn't in Chiddush Oilam. What's called Chiddush Oilam? Maybe in Bria Soilam, yes. But not in Chiddush Oilam. And it totally makes sense. It makes sense. And it also makes sense. Rambam defines Metzias Hashem definitely in those terms. In other words, his God doesn't need to be the Bari. Maybe he pinked is. Rambam will definitely tell you he pinked is. Not in Yisrael, some other places. He would definitely tell you that he pinked is. But he would not. That's not what defines him. It makes total sense to have a God that doesn't create anything. That's not where the world is co-eternal with him. That's really the word, right? As long as God existed, the world also existed. Right. But he exists better. He exists more in some way.
Right.
So this is the Azach was man darf verstehen.
Sorry, that is a very incidental thing.
There's a plan, because in other words, there's two ways of understanding. There is a way of having two different kinds of gods. In other words, a God that has will, versus a God that kind of doesn't have will. It's just like a principle of science. Right. And one God is the one. And the Rambam does say it usually when he talks about Chiddush Oilam. He says that the reason this is the whole kind of Bible, which is very complicated to understand. We usually talk about Chiddush Oilam. He says that Chiddush Oilam is important because we need God to have will in the world. We need to be able to make nissim and stuff like that. Famous Friday, whatever.
So you're asking why are we here? Why are we?
That's Maila. Okay, I understand that. But it's that the Rambam then goes on and says for sure, this is for sure, says a few times that the reason he says beferish, and so there's two things that I still didn't understand. He says the Rambam says beferish two things. The Rambam says beferish, and this is miskim the koladai, that it's totally coherent. It makes sense to be a mamim b'metzias Hashem and nishta mamim b'metzias haboyre. Right? Yeah. In other words, there doesn't need to be a boyre because it doesn't. It may be even impossible, but it's not a thing. And that seems to be now. And the Rambam possibly would tell you that you're quite a good Jew. Maybe you're not as a good Jew, but now the Rambam is kind of clear that if it would be a good proof for this, he would have to agree with it. He just tried to say that there's no proof. But if there would be a proof, he would have to agree, and then what would he do? He wouldn't really have to change much.
Well, if there would be a proof for what?
For Kad Messiah.
For Kad Messiah, okay.
Multi is grave gleich, but Rambam way of believing things that are not true, right. Unlike other people. And
schoolboy and William James.
And therefore, it would not change much. It would change, and so he seems to play around with this. It would change a lot because it would take away God's ability to make nissim. But it definitely wouldn't change his concept of God, because his concept of God is always based on Kad Messiah. And there's some status about this, but the Rambam Perish says, you can see here that his concept of God doesn't include Bria Soilam. Right. So this is eine Sache, was man darf at least verstehen, wie ist der Concept der Arbeit. At least to most of us, our intuition is not like this. Our intuition is that kind of goes together, at least in some sense. This is eine Sache. Zweite Sache is, the Rambam says beferish, and you could minimize it that way. The Rambam says beferish that is proof for God, which is the proof. It says there's another proof. There's two proofs in Yisrael that I just learned the first halach. We'll have to go to the third halach and go through the whole thing. His proof, he says beferish in Moira and in Perish Mishnah, that his proof for God is a proof based on Kadmas.
Yeah, right.
Okay, now this is a very important machloikes was darf verstehen. Why? Why darf man es verstehen? Also, the zweite Sache is the proof. Now, the proofs are important to the Rambam, and there's two ways to understand the proof. There's always two ways to understand proofs, and the Rambam said the fetish, and we have to read also all the proofs at the end of Chaylik Aleph, where he argues with the Kalam people. Because the Kalam, so this is a very important machloek, so this is name Nach Makoy. The Zichir as the Rav Sadi Goen, and the Chosel, which is more or less copy paste on Rav Sadi Goen. Shari Eichel is more or less copy paste on Rav Sadi Goen now, of course. And both of them, as well as the Sefer HaChakir from the Tzemach Tzedek, which is copy paste on Rav Sadi Goen, plus some more new thing. But a lot of
he
mentioned the Tzemach Tzedek or the Sefer HaChakir, which is copy paste on Rav Sadi Goen. It's based on that. They all went a different direction, and probably a much more easy direction, which is that they proved God from Chiddush Laila, which more or less says that there's a line that proof was to them and then it's a step, but there's a developed started existing at one point. Something I must have made it start existing, and that thing that made it start existing is known as God. This is Me'evayne Gerav Sadikun's Rabbi Chaim. He says all kind of things. Nothing. He goes into proving how we know that things can make themselves. Because they can't make themselves because they didn't exist. When did he make himself? Before he started existing or after he started existing? If he made himself after he started existing, then he didn't make himself. Because before he started existing, it didn't exist. So it must be something else I made.
This kids understand.
Yeah. This is much even easier.
All kids understand that. Yeah.
Nicht mit der ganzen Plättel. When did he make himself? Did he make himself before he started existing?
No, but I feel like I have a beginning.
This macht sense. No,
not
the
beginning. They understand. They must feel like I can walk around with this.
Yeah. No,
very schlecht. I'm saying this is very.
The thing that fact.
Somebody told me.
No.
Somebody, I heard like somebody dash me like, whatever. This is Eibik existed. Yeah. So this we don't understand God. So this is this is normal and adas. So that's what we can understand something always existing. Right. The whole scientific world till 100 years ago, all believed the world always existed. That's for sure not the part that we don't understand from God, that He always existed, because they believe that the whole world always existed. Yeah, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. But still,
So this is
all right. But the whole world come around. That's not the chiddush.
You can argue about everything if you want to be like if you want to make cycles, but that is fine. If the world started existing at some point in time, then the Rambam says this also, and this is like with Fetish and Chaylik Bayis. That if that's true, then we have a very simple proof for God, which is this proof that all the children understand. And the Rambam doesn't seem to disagree with that. It's masking. If this would be the case, then he more or less says that although Madaf al Mubis think that was a man, then I get to this.
The Mamunish, they have Chamamunish.
He somewhat says that Mamun Shech. That's only Chalakal, but in Pairik, I just want to see in it says in Pairik Bayis, in Chalik Bayis, Pairik Bayis, right in the beginning. If it started, then obviously the thing that made it start is God, and it's misclarition. And anything that started has something that makes it and can't make itself, and so on. But the Rambam's problem with this is, so there's two problems with this. This is two problem, which is that it's nicht nichtig. That things started ever. And if nothing started ever, then it seems to be much, then you don't seem to be able to work with this proof, right?
Right.
Because if it never started, then you can't say that the one that started is God, and it just never started. Right? And the Rambam doesn't think that you could prove that it never started. That it started. You could believe that, but you can't prove it. So you kind of don't have any proof for God's existence. Whenever he talks about God's proving God exists, he talks assuming that it didn't start. This is the ein ein Weg von Verstehen.
If it's possibly practically, he doesn't need it if it did start.
Right.
Practically, then.
Well, he needs it, but it's kind of simple. That's not the. But this is funny. Why is this funny? Because this is interesting only if you're maybe that's what people understand around you're saying. It's interesting because in other words, it's only interesting as a betar damash tushi. Well, the Rambam lines out of them. Why does he believe it? Because of tradition, right? But die Baldi gleibt sich nicht Chiddush Olam. Darf ich gesagt, dass ich das Chiddush V'reichem. In other words, Peirik Ali gesagt, that it is only the V'reichem. The V'reichem shall Enkel gleiben in Kadmis Olam. Enkel müssen auch gleiben in God. Enkel müssen nicht gleiben in Kadmis Olam. So it seems like he's mashlim with that. That's one thing that we could definitely learn from this whole game that he plays with this. Is wie ich gesagt is sagt, dass Achmul, dass die Soda Teure zu gleiben in Chiddush Olam, but he can't prove it. So if you don't believe in it, he wouldn't really throw you out of his matter. So,
there's some kind of agor that he wrote. No?
Yeah, but that agor still doesn't say that. This I'm sure about actually. In other words, the people, the Rambam Chassidim, like Shmuel and Tibbon, that said that the Rambam believes in Chiddush Olam, and they also in Kadmis Olam. Even if the Rambam didn't personally believe that, the Rambam definitely would not think that we have to kill them, because in that agor, if you look in I'll show you.
I saw Shilat.
Yeah. Oh yeah. This is Shilat. Yeah, but you have to be Medayek because the full of that. Okay, I saw the Ravi is a Kadmis. Okay.
Shilat on the
Shilat.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. This is echt okay. And by the way, this is weird because but that one came into how he defines it. This has to do with what he says Rishon. Okay. Now, in other words, you brought a pusik. Well, in the high kid, can't also something you named the pusik with Ashes Buddha Liam.
It doesn't say Kadmis.
Exactly. So in other words, it doesn't say Kadmis Habayna.
Right.
Kadmis Hagad. So in other words, the Rambam is, even when he says this, which is his like compromise, let's say, way of saying Chiddush, he doesn't say Sha'olam Chiddush. He says that in the Hagur, but don't give him his name. But in the way he says it, is that God is the first. The problem is that God being the first is actually something that works. At least the Derech, nicht literal, it works also in this Kadmis way of having a God. Because as long as you have a God, he's the first in the sense of something. Ich verstehe nicht clue, but in the sense of causality, in other words, like he seems to be saying, is that the days was caused everything else to exist. In that sense, he's the first. That's what I mean to say when I say he's the first.
Right.
So that's still not saying anything about the world. Everything else.
Conceptually the first, like the first.
Right. The first in the conceptual. Right. Not in time. But so therefore like Adam shows that, and therefore whenever even, and this is important, even in Sodat in Mishnah Torah where he says his fourth kind of mean is right. So it doesn't say again Chiddush Olam. And it says, and the Rav over there didn't understand what the Rambam wants. So he said, what kind of person are you talking about? And he says, it probably means Kemisha Omar Lehaichem Sayar Gudel L'Shemutza Samunim. That's a medrash. But I just know that someone told the place of someone else, one of the people that used to argue that the Eibshtag is a God, but they got it was sad. Now the vet there's but that's still not really Kadmis Olam. Maybe that's what the Rambam calls Plato's Kadmis Olam. Rambam is kind of okay with. Aber nicht was der Rambam gemeint. Der Rambam meint zu sagen, ich schreibe dich eine, was sagt das Olam nicht mehr Chiddush. And the only way he writes it is Sha'ane Levadoi. And that also, in other words, like he says here, Kol Anim Tzizeh Lusa is Bilti Kadman. So this is the only place where he says, where you could read him saying that the world is not eternal, Nish Kadman, Yachas Eilim. Now what happened? Then he writes, this is Dagur, right? We'll say 18 Kadat Safa Yisod Nosef, yeah? Now the Rambam, after he gets all his flank writing which more or less says that Donim is talks about this too much. He writes and he says like this. Yeah. He saw that I used to go to Torah Moshe, he used to Olam HaChiddush. וזה שתראיין סויב, וצומני כדמיסה, last for the self, מקדש שם אוהב סלמת יוסי יסעלה מיכה, כמו שבעתי וראתי ומאי. So, firstly, he doesn't say ever, and I think the Rambam is very careful with what he says and what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, according to what's mine there? What's guy before? What's that speaking like? What's the guy before? This is something like verempfering sich, as far as the way I read this whole shtickle, it's him verempfering sich from Akashas man gefragt of him. Is it not there in Moira? It says this says in Moira also in it says something similar. Yeah. It says something similar in Moira. But this is nicht this is nicht etwas is nicht man do. Was nicht man do? It's not what you would expect him to write. In other words, if the Rambam would have said what some people read him as saying, people have misinterpreted me as saying the Olam is nicht Olam Kadman. Chaz v'sholem sahib tzachshon. He could have written that. He said something very different. Firstly, he says that he's such a heuristic Torah's Moshe. So you mean to say we should change the whole ikrim and write Yisod Rishon Sha'olam HaChidesh? That's what you mean to say?
No,
obviously not. Okay, so that's my.
This is like similar to the Ramban. They say that Torah's Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right, but I think that when the Rambam says Torah's Moshe, okay, this is man. So the right option. I think that when the Rambam is very conscious of when he says this is the Yisod of the Torah and when he says this is a Yisod. Like it says in the beginning, Umad HaChachmas, not only Umad HaTorahs. Because the Rambam does, this is true for the Rambam, you read Moedav Chalik Bais says this many times. The Rambam agrees that the Pshat HaTorah, and not only Pshat HaTorah, maybe it's important for the way we understand Torah usually, needs Chiddush Olam. But he doesn't agree that he needs it. The Rambam saying Yisod Torah's Moshe and saying Yisod is two different things. This is a miskin. This is obvious a lot. Also that Torah's Moshe needs light is based on Chiddush Olam. But Torah's Rambam, Torah's Moshe, I'm not sure. And when he says he saw that Gul Torah's Moshe, he's saying things that everyone agrees with. He's not. This is when he's like keeping out of the controversy somehow. I think this is Matzah Dreite Pshat. Anyways, but this line is off. So this line is the interesting line because here is for emphasis. This whole agor is the Chora for emphasis. It's like just like a Girat Chesam Ma'asim, right? It's based on the same thing. The Rambam is going when I published this whole thing, and people said. When Shalom, you wrote a whole book of Pishat Akadmas. And now this is a really, now I'm getting into like the whole machlokes about Shittas Anam. But firstly, you saw that Torah Parik Aleph is the Pishat Akadmas. We call it dice. This is machlokes because the Rambam himself says this. And by the way, most of Moed Navach was the Pishat Akadmas. Nicht nur when he proves God. Also when he talks about Neviah, also Ashgocha, also first Chaylik. In other words, all the important signals. This is important because this is something that people talk about that some people seem to forget. All the big sugyas in Moira and all of the big questions, the Rambam explains everything. The Fishat Hadmas.
Everything, yeah,
Not everything. In other words, this is a side note.
I mean, have the Moira to prove Chiddush, whatever.
So, okay, but then if you look, they have a Maftayach, right? In other words, so Chalik Bayis. Let's take about Chalik Bayis. Okay, Chalik Bayis talks about the first half is about Chiddush so much. Then. Neviah, the Rambam says there's Dayas Nurud Neviah are Tuli but Dayas Sayim B'Chiddush Olam, and he organizes the Shittas Akadmis believes that Neviah is a natural thing, and anyone that has the Achuna can get to it. And Shittas HaChiddush would believe that it's just God decides, and whoever he wants, he could give Neviah. And then the Rambam goes on to explain the whole concept of Neviah, the Shittas HaKadmis. He doesn't say it more or less. That's his shit. The Rambam believes that Neviah is a natural thing. He gives you one. He always does this. Always lives in some space. He says. That's his like Moed Miktas. As Moed as Eibster can. So he always. This is generally the Rambam's way of. Eibster can mechanism, but he basically never does. So Chayshif isn't this mind. This is like very weird. What is this logic? But that's what he said. The same thing when he talks about Hashgocha. His Hashgocha is always more or less Shittas Aristo plus Eibster can actually. Plus nothing, but anyway. So, and what else does he talk about? Same thing, Tamei HaMitzvah. The Rambam said, according to this corresponds to the same thing. According to Shittas HaChiddush, then God could want things. And if he wants things, he just wants the mitzvahs. And the Rambam said that's a stupid God, because that means that God does things without Zeichel. And it's keine Schande. I have to miss things Zeichel mit der Hechrech. So, Mizans do Tamei HaMitzvahs. Then, in the Kovadeim had all the program of Tamei HaMitzvahs. So, it's also Tamei HaMitzvahs. At least, of course, it's nicht mechrech. All these connections might not be mechrech. But the Rambam definitely puts it like Sarot Keili, that all these things relate to the question of Chiddush and Kadmas, and he always.
The hechach is similar to the Metzias, like Mitzvahs also. No,
the Rambam says in the beginning of Pirkei Mitzvahs that there's different ways of understanding mitzvahs the vier roots not the vier chachma, and more or less the roots is shittas hachidish and chachma is shittas hakadmis. If you read
chachma shittas hakad how?
Because that's a shit. Chachma is hechrich. It's the same thing. Things must be like that because there's a reason for them to be like that. Shittas roots means like just I could choose. I could want them. Again, they can't tile. They can't sich tile, but the Rambam structure definitely works. He definitely connects it to fetish. These kind of things, more or less, in different places and different. So another vet, the big
kadmus with chachma and kadmus are very like related.
Very related because kadmus means the world must be, and if it must be, there's a good reason for it to be.
It says
it's not a big.
As the chiddush is the style of kol hakashas like kachlutu, right? Rambam says that.
Right. He says it a few times. Different things, and the Rambam very much doesn't like that. It's the nish michrach again, and especially that's why we have to really figure out all the prokim of how it actually works. But even time it's this is the Rambam. Another vet when the Rambam says in the Zakdoma Tomorrow that this book is to make someone that believes in philosophy also be able to believe in Torah. Well, that's one way of reading the Zakdoma. What he means to say to make someone that believes in Kadma So'ilam still have a religion that makes sense. Nish.
No,
but wie ze kan megleiben aan de via megleibnis in de roots Hashem. They can.
No, but
they think usually partially then he's doing philosophy. You're saying not philosophy. Now you're defining it more.
The philosophy that one of the biggest. That's what I'm saying. These exactly. But then most of his apologetics, most of his work is actually. Of course, maybe he doesn't want you to believe in Kadmus. This is the tricky thing. I'm not saying that he wants you to believe in that, but he knows that anyone that's going to follow the logic must be real. That's why the Rambam is very weird because the Rambam, especially the Prokim about Kalam, are literally Prokim of Fira. In other words, he says all of these people pretend to be proving God's existence and everything, and their proofs don't work. And they don't work. Why? And he literally says what all the Hantig atheists say, because they first made the Maskun and then they made the proof. As the Rambam's big argument against Tzaddik one, basically. He doesn't say his name, but it's him. And like all these people, he says they're not really philosophers. They're just trying to prove everything that they already made the Maskonis, and then they're looking for the proofs. I mean, they have the Matthias. The Rambam quotes. He quotes it from the Stivuni.
Alexandros? No. Alexandros?
No. Something. Matthias Hadas Alech Zachra Matthias Hadas, right? And this seems to be very important. In other words, the Rambam understands. So I feel that he understands that someone that's going to only believe things that are proven is going to believe in Kadmus Olam, and this person has a big problem, like the Rambam puts it in the beginning of Moira. Other Oishi Yashlech, whatever it says in the Agdoma. Either he has two options. Either he's Koifer b'Chayr or he's Koifer b'Chachma, and both of them he's not going to feel good. So, Yesh Loima, we can't believe in beide. How are you going to believe in both? Basically, by me explaining, you don't call it a killer, including God's existence, most importantly, because that's the most important thing.
It comes out like a cooler, then cooler in that.
It's a cooler that helps you feel it, for sure.
No, even Kadmus, if you don't believe in Kadmus, you don't have to know all the Ikrim.
Oh yeah,
what?
You know it anyway.
Because they're cooler. What?
You believe it anyway. It's all based.
No, not the Rambam's Ikrim.
These Ikrim, I don't know. But
you don't take the Rambam's Ikrim. You believe in Torah, right?
Of course, that's what Abravanel said. Abravanel said that the Rambam's Ikrim only are not really the way the Torah thinks. Because Abravanel says that we don't really need Ikrim because we just believe in the Torah. Whenever it says in the Torah, it's true. And we get in the Torah. Why do you need Ikrim? It's a chimra and a kula in the same way.
I'm saying if all these ikrim are...
That's what they say. Yeah, the Rambam's ikrim are really, well, the Yidgam ikrim are doing both because they're also teaching.
Rambam, you could say, according to Rambam, he's only trying to...
but the question is what the Rambam looks at lechatchila. So that's always the question. If the Rambam looks at the Novach, but that's what I'm trying to get to. So now, in other words, this is Zichin. In other words, this is not relevant to the question what the Rambam personally, this is Nishman problem. This is Lushan Hara, and maybe the Rambam Bechlal was a Hunas and he pretended to be Muslim for 5 years. Okay, and that's not relevant to anyone. It's only relevant that the Rambam's way of thinking, that's why this gets into the thought, the Misha, is that you could be a very big Pal Mam and Basha, more or less if you like Avicenna, or maybe a very
which is what?
Schade für den different because it's not connections with the Chilik. If you like Avicenna or Averroes, you could be a Voile Yid. They were not so well, but the Rambam thinks that you could be still a Voile Yid. Maybe you could even be all the mitzvahs because they have common, right? Even if you'll be like that. That's what the whole Rambam is about. The whole thing is about. In other words, that's why I'm. In other words, he's very big Makarev. He's a very big Michael in a certain sense. He's very big Makarev. He says even if you go like this, the main thing is to believe in God, and you will have a God also. That's one way of understanding, and we could understand that as a b'di Eved. Since I can't personally, I believe whatever it says in the Torah, but I can't prove. So what should I do? Well, b'di Eved, I'll give you the proof like this, and I'll give you b'di Eved, b'doichek, like someone. Rav Kook says something like this in his Mammon on the Rambam. Not the language, but some of my friends always summarize it. What's Shasat Chak? If you have a kasha, it doesn't have a teretz. Okay, that's Yochanan and Shasat Chak. Shasat Chak nafshi, something like that. That's
if you didn't say, you could have said it.
Rav Kook says something like this, and he has a famous Mammon about the Rambam, because someone wrote in an article in the Zeitung against the Rambam, and he's not really a fan of the Rambam. I forget what it's called.
You're saying all stuff more.
This is one thing, but this is weird. Why is it weird? Because why would he have to do that in Mishnah Torah?
Right, that's the thing. You're saying this is
very weird.
You're saying it's actually not.
So there's two things. Firstly, people say, okay, so the Rambam himself is that Shasat Chakne. That's still only Lashon Hara. That's only relevant to Hilchot Lashon Hara. What's relevant is that the Rambam actually did this to everyone. And therefore, I think must be another thing here. There must be something deeper than that going on, because the Rambam, he knows when he says it openly that Mishnah Torah is nishka for this. There's a lot of things. There's probably things in the Mishnah Torah that are objectionable.
Yeah, the way he says that I was to lead him here, that I should have Moshe, call it some Shaiman. Clearly against the
right. For example, maybe there's other examples. Not mine. I didn't think about that. But I'm sure not a philosophy book, it's a halacha book. He's clear that it's a halacha book. And faket, Rambam says in the Geret Chesed that he saw that, firstly, he saw there's no halacha book, good halacha book, he wrote a halacha book. And even more than that, he saw that kind of ice this was the Eibush that is. But the Ragish was in the halacha side, he feel like if I mention, plain mention, was verstanden. So wissen, at least the basic was mit da wissen. So why couldn't he write it? For them, he could have written what he read. So it seems like what's going on is, and seems to be I have to not get the proof if it makes sense, because I don't spend the weekend and didn't figure it out. But it seems like the Rambam thinks that it's actually these proofs are actually better proofs than the other proofs. Nishna mitzad that it's l'shetu soy shala. And this is problematic, because then what do you do if it's false? But it seems that the Rambam thinks that when he says, so that's this line, when he says, what does it mean by Michle? Sonst kann opfragen, als the Oilem nicht kann, and that's what he means.
So that's bad.
He could have said that. Yeah. He could have said, he could have said, yeah, I'm always gam the fish is ha.
I should have finished that if I do him. There is machen the ganze Sache Chiddush, so say, should you call Stapik and so fragen, and should machen Metzias Hashem on such a Yisodriya.
I understand, but in other words,
it says that, right?
It seems to me, and it seems that it says that in Heilig Beis, although he seems to be contradicting himself sometimes. It seems to say that mechanisch proven alles, was es wichtig zu proven wegen Gott und Kadmus. And I don't know how this actually works. That's what I've had up to that. In other words, it seems that maybe the parts of eine Gif, ich weiß nicht welche parts, although the Fetish says not like that, and it seems to be a steer.
No, but I got to Kadmus.
So that's what I'm saying. So the drama, it's important to have a proof. It's important to have a proof, right? Because if you don't have a proof, then you don't know. And I don't have a proof of the feature that's a Chiddush, because Tol Shitz Chiddush doesn't have a proof.
Right.
In other words, knowing God means knowing the feature that's a Kadmus.
Okay.
Is Einza. That's okay, but Kadmus is false. How is this supposed to work? No Chiyuv, like let's like Chiyuv mitzvah Simon the Reise, Leida Sheyesh Leha, which means Leida Fidei Rechasach, Fidei Mitei Chochis, right? The Chiyuv mitzvah zeh, Iyaf Shel Kaim El Lefishet. And I think, and this is a thing that I didn't understand, the Rambam, at least in the Rambam, we have to go through the whole Parak and try to learn it. Maybe it'll help me understand. But in Chaylik Aleph Parak, first he has a list of Akdomas, right? Akdomas, 26 Akdomas, axioms that you have to understand. So in order to make the proof that I don't understand any of that, I might understand, but and then Parak Aleph, he has 4 proofs, actually like 8 proofs, but 4 real proofs and then 3 fake proofs. And then a Parak Bais, it says, makes a summary and it says, and Parak Bais, then he gets to your Memunavshich. Then you don't need proof. And then he says, you also have proof. The guy, the which is the way that we learned here. And actually, this person on the side already writes that in the previous parak it doesn't say that. It says that.
The what? The what? Again? What's it?
In this shtickle it says that the Metzias Ha'ayil, we know the Metzias of God, we know bullshit is. If it's Mechidish, then we know. If it's not Mechidish, we also know.
Right.
And also we know that it's Echad V'Shayna Give.
Right.
Not by the shittis. Right. And he quotes himself. In Parak Bais, he quotes himself. Just like I said in Parak Aleph in the third proof.
Would you play though? No.
The third proof is this proof. The Mechiv Metzias proof. I have a sentence proof.
Okay.
And this person already writes, and if you actually turn back the page, you see him saying the opposite over there. That page before, it actually says that all of these proofs only work if you assume Kadmas. And it doesn't say at all, and what he quotes himself, it says the opposite where he quotes it. Of course, we could just say that he's lying. But ich weiß nicht, was ist der Territ, but ich weiß. So
the kasha basically is what is this thing that I'm putting down like basic in the yad, which is
so it's not only in other words, not only the proof. It seems also like I'm saying, proof by him means also like the definition, or almost the definition, or also maybe the mitzvah, and that definition doesn't work. Why can't he at least write? Maybe he wrote both. Maybe he wrote Shabura. He doesn't even say why can't he write created everything. And also, if Imtem Tzeloima she didn't create, it's funny that he goes backwards like this.
In fact, that you say that you used to go to Moshe.
No,
that's for sure.
I find he said he wants to be Mechel,
so this is in other words, the Rambam knows the God of Kadmas more or less. That's the thought. When he worships God, he understands. In other words, if we assume all of this whole correlation between from Kadmas to Chadish to everything else, it seems that the God of Kadmas is the only one we understand. In the Rambam system, if it holds, if you think differently. In the Rambam system, the God of Kadmas is the one we understand. Is the one we can understand as mitzvahs. We could be Nevi'im, basically. In the Rambam system, you could be a Navi. In the other system, who knows? You have to.
What do you mean?
If Navi is a natural thing, try. Maybe you'll get the half of it, or at least something. If Navi is just magic, who knows? Maybe.
You're sure you can become according to Rambam.
More or less. I have to reserve the right to refuse. But why would he? Rambam more or less, Rambam more or less the Heschel is a famous man, but the Rambam thought he was a Navi. But then other places writes openly that he's not. Rambam says sometimes that Sakti, the mean Hashra, which is a language.
Okay. I mean, that world, they were busy with these things.
He really seems to have tried to be a Navi. He says that it's hard because we don't have enough money, whatever.
According to how you're becoming a Navi, you're
cycle.
Like it says, so that's also, yeah, but there must be some step where it becomes Navi and not just cycle. Like exactly, just cycle. That would be the very radical thing to say, but I think the Rambam is loaded that.
No,
the Seichel Dan Masig. The Seichel Dan Masig. Something Seichel Dan Masig.
If you've seen the Sechel HaPoel, then somehow it works. It says that he literally, when he by the way, you could see by Nevi'ah, even Nevi'ah is actually the thing that he defines in the most philosophical way in the Yigdal Mikvah. This is what you have to believe about Nevi'ah, okay? This is literally the Sittas HaKabbalas of Nevi'ah. This is also the Kohen of Shasayim actually called it. I don't know what this means. I mean, I know what it means, but it makes sense in his philosophy. And now, to explain this correctly, I'll have to write it different, but I'm just telling you, this is what you have to believe. This is not Lahaman Hashem and B'nai Udam, like it says. This is Laida She Ha'udam Yesh B'nai Nevi'im. Very different. Okay, so the kid said, ich weiß nicht. The kid is the only maskuna that I have is that Boira is according to the Rambam. That's why I think is maybe something that does make sense.
Like according to the Rambam, the Vu is something which is muchach.
Yeah, God has the right to refuse.
No, I'm saying we forget the refusing part, but after refusing, it's something which is
if you do the right preparation, you will get.
You understand that? Yeah, that you understand.
What Nevi'ah actually is, I don't know.
But no, but you understand that I know it seems to me I'm all over it, that I don't understand it. That there must be Nevuah. You can prove.
It's a natural thing. That's the.
And that's what he says. No, they're proof that's understandable that there must be such a
maybe you're saying maybe there was never such a smart person. Who said that?
Who said there must be such a smart person? Even who said you have to be able to become a Navi?
No,
why do you have to be able to become a Navi? I understand he's saying it's a natural thing.
I don't know if he has proof for that. I think that's that.
The Torah says it's Nevuah.
The Chodesh saw this is from the Torah.
I think all these guys, all these what's the names again? All these they said this prophecy. No, all the whatever.
Aristotle, yeah. Well, these guys were religious.
Das macht der Chayzik. The kids macht the Chayzik.
But the kids, I don't. Okay, that's not happening. No, I think. So Aristotle believed in Nevi'ah, by the way, in some kind of book on dreams.
What is that? Where did that come from? Like what? No. Why should it be Nevuah?
But I think that it's kind of the other way around. Now that there's Nevi'ah, now we have to explain how it works. It has to work naturally.
But who said there's such a thing? Nevuah, right? Who said there's Nevuah? That's something I know, like male.
I don't think he has I don't know if he has a proof for that. I think maybe the reality is like that because he looks at the Aristotle and sees a guy that has more or less Nevi'ah. Or he looks at
what he knows things that you can't know.
I think that the Rambam, in other words, it seems that the Rambam, for example, Moshe Rabbeinu, forget about Aristotle. The Rambam believes that really likes Moshe Rabbeinu.
Yeah,
he was yeah, but he really likes Moshe Rabbeinu. Yeah, but he really likes him, and he really, at least that's what he pretends. You always be choished him that he just because he had too much amena, but he seems to really think that his Torah is amazing, and he almost believes that it's impossible for a human being to get such what he says such balanced Torah. That's literally what it is.
Like a.
I mean, that's what he considers Nevuah. He did something impossible. So that's the answer.
Not about impossible.
He
so
sees
smart.
The Torah is the example. The fact that we have a Torah, that's the answer.
It's not a proof.
The fact that we have the Torah, where does this come from? The Seichel couldn't have done it.
I don't know, but the Seichel could have done it. The Seichel did it in a certain sense, but that's not. It's not about the Seichel couldn't have done it. See, that wouldn't be the way he would say it. He would say that this proves that the Seichel could do it. Or maybe you have to be Moshe, which happens once in ever, but that's different. The Seichel did it. In other words, he sometimes says the Moshe Rabbeinu it wasn't, but the Seichel did it. The Nevuah is something natural. You're asking me who Michael Tyson is such a natural thing. I see that there's some people that did it or got close to it.
No, it started from the Seichel. We went naturally, fine. But at the end of the day, who said you ever go beyond that naturally? Where's the evidence?
Really.
Where's the evidence for the thing called Nevuah?
It's not clear.
Where do you get this word from? Where do you get the word from Nevuah?
The word we get from the Torah, but that's not a problem. Tell you what the word means. The word means tachlis aseichel. This certainly when you say natural, to him this is natural. To me, I don't even know what it means. But to him, it's natural. The seichel is nidbar for seichel apol. The seichel apol is a real thing. Aristotle discussed it actually, according to some information, and it exists, and it gives you shefa. I don't know, it gives you knowledge. Finish 15. Let's get back to where we are. But in other words, he sees. Anyway, okay.
But the Yikka problem is your Yikka over here is what's going on in the
beginning of what kind of God? The kid is what kind of God is there that is not a creator God? doesn't need to be the creator. And maybe it even makes it worse if he's the creator. That's the problem. In some sense, it makes it worse. Now, I know one reason that makes it worse because some other people say that the olam is kalman, and therefore we have to be able to empathize them. But that doesn't seem to be the whole. It can't be the whole story. It makes no sense. It could be it is. It could be it is. But it doesn't seem to make sense to me because then maybe at least you have to add the fact that he wants to himself have something that he understands and he can prove. And if he can't prove it al derech hachidush, or even if he's going to say Chiddush is an assumption that I have, but I can't prove that himself, so I basically don't really. This is where it gets very tricky because it means to say that he doesn't really believe in that. He believes in that only. This I think is true, but maybe controversial. When someone says a statement like this, Mitzad hasaychel ef shelech yachas achidush, and Mitzad havasayre, you could believe it. So there's two ways of reading that statement, but this I don't think it's enough. This is a big critic in
Islamic philosophy. But
there's two ways of reading it. That's what I understand. There's two ways of reading it. One way is that there's one thing called a minna. Do you believe or do you not believe? And then why could be different reasons. I could believe mitzad. I could believe mitzad and mitzad. But I could believe. In other words, there's still only one thing called believing. According to that framework, when the Rambam says, and this is literally definitely what he says with it, and he loy mamen ef shelech yach, ef shelahamen. So tachlis, we could really bracket out that whole thing because it's only relevant if you care about that part. But the Master says, I believe, and I get into it. But now there's another way of understanding, which seems to be more accurate, which is that there's not one thing called believing. They could believe, but they kind of buy the labor una stira. In other words, believing is just, let's say, believing is just a level of certainty, or a level of understanding, or a level of knowing. And I could talk about different. You could always talk about different things. In other words, when I tell you mitzada saychel, I believe that it's like this, and mitzada it's like this. This doesn't reduce to one thing. Okay, so therefore I do believe. But it means that adayam hazeh, there's these two things. In my mind, there's two things. In other words, I really believe mitzada saychel, mitzad whatever chaylik ha'olam it's called saychel. I think like this. Mitzad chaylik ha'olam or chaylik ha'mind that's called like this. I think like this. In other words, if you ask me the thought what I believe, I'll answer you like this. If you ask me the thought philosopher, I'm going to answer something different. And it's not a contradiction. I'm not faking it. It could be that lamas, and maybe the achru lamas. It could even be that I'm going to use the Mesorah because I think that it's not strong enough, and this is somewhat stronger for whatever reason. But it's still so blacht aibig day mitzad saychel eine is nicht emes is a chaylik of his amina, is a chaylik of his, and therefore since he believes that there's a mitzvah to know God mitzad saychel nishna mitzad Mesorah, at least if we could, so he could. It's very nice to have this compartment that says amina. We could call amina taklid, right? We could call. I'll tell you that answer. Anyone that's asked me, you saw Torah Moshe is like, ich kann fragen. They tauscht nicht man andere parts von meinem Kopf, which is different, kind of a different faculty. It's
living in a different
if
plane.
I say levels, I don't different planes. I don't like to say it as if it's like Lebovich or you know, when you ask me with a philosopher, with a scientist, I say like this, with a religious person, I say like that. That's just contradicting yourself. That's what he said. How old is the world? Depends. He asked Shai Lebovich, the mom, and looked at the extra years. After I have decided that was mine. But I think it makes sense that I'm.
Leibniz said that?
Yeah.
I thought he was more honest.
No, that was his honesty. He's like, I don't know.
No, I thought he was busy making machines.
Hier gesucht Allah. Ich weiß, aber ich meine, der Rambam ist echt du a heilig, was heißt verstehen, was ist ein wichtiger heilig, because at least since now this is what I want to get to, and therefore macht sense. Ich meine, das macht sense. When you say that levels of certainty, it's kind of weird because. But you could have both, not the Torah stira, nicht mit der Zuge Chazayin and school Zuge Chazayin.
Yeah.
And that's a real thing. That's always going to be important to me. It's always a Kimtos as well. In other words, there's not only one thing to be a Ma'am and Rapikoris. It could be two things. You could be Ma'am and Tzadasayich, Rapikoris, Tzadasayich, Ma'am and Tzadasayich. And there's two different. It's not like there's not only one button, one switch. It's not like Ich Gleib. It's meant Ich Gleib. Because by him Gleib meint verstehen. Like anything else, you could be sure of something 100%, you could be 90%, you could be maybe in Halucha Lamasif, you'll have to say Drushim is Medrash, you'll have to say it one way because for different reasons, but your cup can understand a lot of different levels of The Rambam says this openly, by the way, in his letter on this is my big source for this, but people talk about in his letter on astrology.
Right.
The Rambam says this openly. He says the Ament of Bleiben der Reis Achen. Mitzurich she chalik bedartoi. Shezeh mantim v'nai Asayach, v'zeh v'nai Masoyer, v'zeh v'nai Navi, something like that. In other words, it's even after the Maskuna, it makes a difference how you get to it. But this is a cycle de Gesatem, and this is a minute de Gesatem. Now, because the Rambam wants to know God, it's very important to know God. So
he does
when he knows God, for himself or for you also, because he believes that you cannot know it.
That's what he talks about the Chusa in the palace, in the palace. The Chusa is Nora Ma'am and Taklid, right? Then you have the person who's the Kim and the Tasogas. It's a different type of different. Look at Kim Tzita Pasandish. He's coming to a different type of a minute.
I'm saying that you could have both. You could have both at the same time, but it's not. It's still right. Because, in other words, when he says,
right? It says you can go with one mahalach. 3 reasons why to believe in Chiddush, right? What's because wegen the soiser b'chakel kaf you don't believe in Chiddush. Wegen zuksa kenish the katzana falaf the one reason. I don't know what that is. It's kind of like a moral reason. Whatever, yeah. And then it sounds like moral reason from him from Kant. Whatever, but they have this rayas do puchas laikas of Yenazat. If you can go with the Yisod, that's the Sat or something like this. And then this thing in noch eins wegen dus the kabuda from Moshe Rabbeinu. So the thing, so that's why we should be mad if that's right.
Right. So what I'm saying is that these reasons are always going to stay there. It's not that you're not going to throw them away after we have a maskun.
Right.
And therefore, in a noisa, because the Ram himself, Ram believes that you need to know God. You need to know Him as much as you could. He's going to want to know Him. Nicht. In other words, he can't say ich habe gemacht eine maskuna. He only made the maskuna in olam master, in olam saying, or olam minna, but in olam cycle, which is the olam where
everyone wants to know about action, whatever. Yeah, okay.
In the olam and then that miser is trending them. It's not nicht genig. This is still saying ledevreichu in a more internal way. There needs to be a more serious.
Well, what is it?
There needs to be a more than that. But this is at least ein Sach, was emes. Chayshevs in genig. That to verstehen besser that man. But Rama wants you to worship a God that you know, and we don't know the God of Chiddush Olam. We believe in Him, but we don't know Him. We know the God of Mechiv Metzias or of Maniga Galgal.
But he accepts that like it could be like the justified. Is it justified? The one of Chiddush Olam is justified in Rama's word.
Yeah. Well, it's justified. What does it mean justified? You're not crazy if you believe it. Obviously, smart people believe it. Rambam even.
No, on what basis?
No, I didn't say that.
No, on what basis? He doesn't know.
He's looking at, if you asked him on the cycle, he would tell you, but I don't know.
What's the justification for that? What's the justification for
and the proof. That's the
whole. No, not proof. No.
What's the justification for what? What's the justification?
He does.
No, what's the justification?
He has Chiddush proof, not proofs.
I don't know.
There's not just. Yeah, there's also arguments, but Rama thinks that those arguments are not conclusive.
No, so he justifies it where he justifies it because it's from the Nevuah.
Right. Now what's Nevuah? So it doesn't work.
No. That's what I'm saying. That's what I think.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
What? Well, yeah.
He's saying that if Chiddush is from Nevi'ah, and Nevi'ah doesn't work if you don't have Chiddush and it's backwards. But he means tradition, maybe. I don't know. I hear.
Nevi'ah is only with.
You can't, if you don't have not supernatural Nevi'ah, then you can't say that Nevi'ah. Can't take that kind.
What does that mean? You saying Nevi'ah is only both of Kadmas?
If supernatural Nevi'ah, only it's a circular logic of that. It's like the Rebbe Abdi HaKodesh, because the Rebbe himself.
No, I'm just saying, isn't Nevi'ah more pushed with Chiddush, no? Nevi'ah is more pushed.
Right, but that doesn't prove it. It's not a proof. The proof with the guy. Yeah, it could be that doesn't mean Nevi'ah. It means, I don't know. It's very hard to know why. I don't still. That's to the guy today, but I don't want to. That's why I don't know if Kadmas Olam is really the thing. I think the Rambam definitely thinks that there's a better proof for God's existence without Kadmas Olam, with Kadmas Olam.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why. That's not Bashleim Favos. That's why there's a
you're saying Bichlal more than Memush. You're saying more than
not only Memush, right? I think it's really a better proof, and it's also really a better proof for maybe not for God's existence, but for the Chinas that he wants to have with God. In other words, Achdes and Shaina Gif, which are the two somewhat positive things that he allows you to say about him. It's definitely those proofs according to the Rambam work better in the Kadmis way than in the Chiddush, although I don't know how. And like I'm saying, the Handige people, the people that I read, they all say, yeah, Avicenna has proofs and so on. They all have proofs of God existing. And Avicenna, this is Tamar taken from some proof. And Avicenna goes on to say that he could also prove his attributes, that he's one, and nobody buys it, those parts. I don't know why. They say, but ich weiß nicht, ich kann nicht verstehen, das darf man lernen.
This is from that book?
No, I don't know, I found it on the internet, it looks nice. I have no idea who it's from. Sangi, that guy.
I'll just talk over.
No, it's very clear. I don't know where it's from. So anyways, that's this thing. The Yitzchak is that the Rambam's God is not called Bashef. That's the Yitzchak. It's called Mutzi.
The Eberstein can call?
You have to no in the Rambam.
No, the Eberstein can say.
If you mean the Elia and the Rishon,
you can call him Bashef.
You can call whatever you want.
No, that's not the Rambam person. You know what I mean? The Pshat from Hirsch is going to come the Rambam.
No, actually,
in this Zach, he goes right away. He says that Bashef una brie und the brie and Torah is like
but was it like right. The Rambam actually, and it's not only the Rambam that has a God. Not only the Rambam, basically all the Mekabbalim also have it like that. You just add Tfiras, but the Mekabbalim's and Saf is Mechiv and Tzitz. According to most Mekabbalim.
Most Mechiv and Tzitz.
Yeah. All the Mekabbalim, the original Kabbalah started out like this, that since Mechiv and Tzitz is not enough for them, because they want a God with more attributes than that, so they added to God all of these spheres. But the Ensaf is equivalent.
Which
the standard, the mainstream Kabbalah.
Cool.
From the beginning.
Right?
Of course not.
No.
This is not true. By the way, that's not true.
No.
That's not true. That's Piram Toiris from people talking about Tzimtzum. No, it's not true at all. It's not true. It's not true. And Saf, it's not true. By the way, it's not true. It's not true. Only people after that Isel that's starting Piram Toiris about. That's not true. That's not true. All of the Mekabbalim call Atmas and Saf. It's plain Nishnamas. There's some people Chavatskas convinced you of this.
No, Shemamina says it.
No, he doesn't say that. He also doesn't.
Why did they make a new name for it inside?
Oh,
they talk a lot of it. It's a big controversy. Very controversial. Before Chabad, they talk about.
You have to explain his position of it.
This problem happened because Arizal didn't care and he said Ensach Tzimtzum Atzma. That's where the whole problem started. The fact that they didn't invent Kabbalah, they didn't invent any. It's very weird to read Arizal as inventing any theological ideas in Kabbalah because he just makes Kabbalah. He doesn't do theology at all. So we cannot even talk about it. Therefore, when Chabad does it, it's mamish menafs neged. Therefore, all the Arizal, we can assume that Arizal agrees to everything that Ramak said theologically, unless he disagrees with it openly. And the Ramak and everyone else, and the Ramak is a summary of everyone else. There was some of them said that Ensaf is less than that. Is the Sfiras HaKesser. In other words, that Kesser is Kadman. But besides for that, all the Kabbalah is always based on this duality. There is Atzmis. Well, Atzmis is a word that the Lubavitch has made up. But before that, they had a word called Ensaf. And the Ensaf is it just means infinite, which is just a different word from Mechiv Tzitz. It comes from a different philosopher. I don't know, maybe they made it up, but it's a word for Mechiv Tzitz. And they said that Mechiv Tzitz is not enough. That's what they said. That's what I asked before. I don't know why it's not enough, but they said it's not enough because the Torah says a lot of other things about God, and they have to be about God, not only about what He does. That's the big. The Rambam, okay, it's not about, everything else is not about God, it's about what He does. It's about the stories of it's basically about the world, not about God. And they still wanted it to be about God, so they added this middle thing somehow, which is known as Esesfiras, which are about God, but they're not Mechiv HaMetzias. Okay, sure. So that's therefore. What do I want to say? I wanted to talk about the name. Therefore, the Mekubulim, and this starts from the Zohar itself, says it's a fetish, and the Mekubulim before the Zohar, whatever, the other Mekubulim, like Rabbi Ezriel, and people said this also very openly, they said that when the Torah talks about God's names, it's not talking about Mechila Mitzvah. This is a big machlokas Rambam and Mekubulim, where it's kind of upside down. The Rambam, when I saw the Rambam, he said the Torah starts, he saw the Sirish Tayv Shem Havai, right? And the reason is because the Rambam in Perek Samach Aleph said that Shem Havai means Mechila Mitzvah. The Rambam said this is the only Shem Etzem, also Shem Eya. Besides with that, Havai and Eke both mean Mechila Mitzvah. Hamutzi Asher Mutzi, that's the Rambam's translation for Eya Asher.
We say we were there. What Perek?
Eya Asher Eya, and Perek Samach Aleph. It says Havai means Mechila Mitzvah because Havai means existing and it means existence, something like that. And Eya means that, Hamutzi Asher Mutzi, something like that. And so on. In other words, and all the other names of this Torah Pe'illah. In other words, Shakai or Adna, that's obvious, has meaning. They're not about him. The Mekubulim came, and for some reason they were not happy with it. They said Shem Havai cannot mean Mechila Mitzvah. Shem Havai is more than that. Right, but the Rambam, that's what I'm saying. What's wrong with Mechila Mitzvah? It's also nitfas. It's nitfas. Maybe we can't like put it into a bottle, but they have this idea that Hashem is something that you can put into a bottle, and Havai and Mechila Mitzvah you can't put into a bottle. So it doesn't make sense to call it a name. Although the Rambam said when Mechila Mitzvah is the word, this is something that I talked about before when I said I don't know what it means. Well, we do understand, we don't understand. Anyways, they said that Mechila Mitzvah means something that we cannot grasp, and therefore we're going to call it Ein Sof. And when we say Ein Sof, they deliberately choose the word Ein Sof because it's a negative term. It doesn't mean anything. It just means undefined. Basically, Ein Sof is if you want to pay a more modern term, you would call it undefined. Like, when you do a calculator, when your calculation it says undefined, they really mean undefined. They don't really mean infinite. Sometimes they do, but it's complicated. And then they said, so even though it was the Shem Havai is Sfiris, Lelemat Tzilis, later language. And then they said the crazy thing, which the Rambam would that God isn't in the Torah. Zohar says this openly in the Edna. Shmuel Atika is parish by Reise Chadzim 3 times.
So what's that? That's
according to the over there it means God. It means
I think Kaddish too.
Yeah, I think Kaddish is in the Zohar plays with this, but usually means Ein Sof. Sometimes means Ein Sof. The Zohar says, and this is he took the Rebbe Zil said this also, that God isn't in the Torah. The Torah was not given by God, because God is beyond the Torah. God, the Torah is only by Olam Atzilis. Maybe one time it's in the Torah, according to if you read Eya Shrei, like the Rambam is reading. But Havai is definitely not that. So in other words, the Rambam's at least put his God into the Torah, and he said that Havai means this. And then on they went one step further than that, and they said that our God is not in the Torah, the real God. In other words, the Mechila Mitzvah.
Well, not what you're calling God. They're talking about.
But this is the game. In other words, then they say, this is games because the Tzfiris once didn't exist, so they're not necessary.
But no, because they're just as necessary as Olam Kadmon. The casual, it's a cause. He's the cause of them, but they exist with him. They're not. There's not a boyry of them.
Yeah. They exist in time also. In time in the sense that they
didn't
once exist.
Who said they
exist? All the Mekubulim agree. There is also in the beginning of its time. The spirits didn't always exist. They're not.
The Nefesh is like Kaddish.
No, it's not. It's not. At least not according to most. There's some Mekubulim. Some Mekubulim say this.
Yeah.
Those Mekubulim are really the bigger apikasim. But the regular Mekubulim, even Gabbai believes that the spirits are God, and he believes more or less. But the Ramak and the Arizal, they all say
no, not God. It's like Aristo, like
no,
like that type
of. But different than Aristo because there is Kiddush. They don't believe in Kadmis as spheres. At least the Ramak doesn't believe in Kadmis.
Right.
There was a time which he says is not really time because before time. This is weird, but because I don't know what definition of time he's using. But he says they definitely believe that there was a time which we cannot call time because they see time as something very physical, but there was a time.
No, he wasn't mufrach to do it. You mean to say that he wasn't
mufrach to do it? No. They mean to say that it didn't once exist. Because they read Bereshis Bara Elohim, Bereshis Bara Spheres, according to Ramban says that really Pashas Bereshis is about creation of spheres out of Ein Sof. Well, technically creation of Zion spheres, the Chlein is out of Bina, but whatever. In other words, there's a story of creation of the spheres. The spheres are not eternal.
Right, so it's like a kesser, right? So it's a kesser, some say.
That's what I'm saying. According to some of the Rishonim, the kesser was always, and the Ramak is very mad at that. He said the kesser ulas some chiddush. But anyways, then they just play a game where they say we could call this God if we want. Okay, if you want, but it's not God. All of these fancy words with Achdus that ends up as one with the Spirit it's just not true, according to themselves. As long as the definition of God is necessary existence. If you have a different definition of God, then maybe, which might be what's going on. You can't say that definition of God is necessary and then spirits are also God, because they're not necessary. You could say that it's a different definition of God. Maybe God has a lot of definitions. For example, what's one of the things that, well, what example? Now I'm starting to say things that I don't know. If you have a definition of God as a creator, creator is nothing special, by the way. Even the Yeshma'an is nothing special according to the Kibbutz, because Yeshma'an doesn't ever mean Kipshita. But then you could say that anything that kills Yeshma'an is something that is similar to God, is a God in a different definition of you. And all kinds of different definitions. But in the most basic definition of the Rambam, I don't think anyone believes that anything else is besides for the Ein Sof, although besides from Chira Mitzvah and Chira Mitzvah. Therefore, I feel like they're all just pulling the wool over our eyes when they start saying, well, it's God and it's not God. Explain me what your definition of God is before we start talking about this.
You have to figure out.
That's the problem. If you have a different definition of God, then you have to tell me what it is.
They don't tell you anything. You have to figure out this. You have to in the cloud.
Max says, I don't know what he thinks.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
That is all. He's coming after that, but I don't think it should be so complicated. It could be that they have a different way of understanding God, and then it's different. This comes down. But there's other ways. I have noch 20 Gegens verstehen, but I'm just saying that in this way, as long as you have a very sharp distinction between Matthias and not Matthias, between Mechira and Matthias, not Mechira and Matthias, then it will unless you could say what another crazy idea you could have is that Mechira and Matthias is not only one level, it's 100 levels. Who knows? We can say whatever we want. It makes sense. Right? We could talk about things being more or less necessary. I don't know how, but maybe you could. I don't know.
No, the definition.
Again, just like first, before we had this idea, we thought things either exist or they don't exist. Now we figured out that there's 2 ways to exist. Maybe there's 10 ways. I don't know. Maybe. Or you could just say that this is all the wrong way of thinking about it. We have to think about it in a totally different language. That kind of not. Anyways, okay. No, it's only interesting to me this week in the sense of what you mean when you say you don't understand. Oh, this is what I want. So in other words, it seems to me when people say they don't understand God because it's Mechira and Metzias, they are assuming that there is something else besides for that we don't understand. That could make sense. That Ramalek says that we understand Metzias and not Mahos. Right, but this is weird because this is assuming that he has a Mahos. The Rambam says he doesn't have a Mahos. There's no Mahos, there's only Metzias. Well, his Metzias is equivalent to his Mahos, however the language is. And we have to learn Perek Zayin next time. And therefore, God is only Mechira Metzias, he has no Mahos. Right. Now, Rambam says Perek Zayin, this is another whole philosophical pshat, Perek Zayin. The Rambam says that when we say God exists, those words don't really add up because God is his existence. So it's very different when we say anything else existing. This is a big machlokes Talmidei have how to understand that, and the Rambam is taking a side of that machlokes over there. And therefore the Rambam says that he exists without a nimtza v'lib mitzias. That's the language that he uses there. And therefore people come and say, okay, so here you're saying that there is some existence that we don't understand. We can only say that it exists, but it's kind of the opposite. Because we actually think that he only exists. That's the chilek. If you assume there is a his, there is a what
only exists.
Okay. If you assume that God, there is nothing, that's the concept. It's a thing that only exists and doesn't do anything else, isn't anything else. The Mekabbalim some people seem to assume that that's all we know about him. But really, he also in his spare time plays ping pong. We don't really know what kind of ping pong he plays. And that's what we mean to say when we say you don't understand Atzmas.
Okay.
But that doesn't seem to be what the Rambam is saying. The Rambam seems to be saying that there isn't anything else besides for it existing.
This is what he is.
Exactly. If he would be more, then you would ruin the whole idea of Mechiv HaMetzias. Then he would be just like everything else.
What does it mean that something? So what's the thing that exists?
Gunish, there is no thing that's what I'm saying. There is no thing called God that exists.
That's the thing. That thing
It is existence. Well, we have to understand. If this idea makes sense, right? I'm just saying, okay, if this idea makes sense, I don't know, but that's what he says. And therefore, there isn't anything to understand. The only way you can understand we don't understand is if whenever you say we don't understand something, you're assuming that there is something to understand, right? So that's why I keep on bumping into this idea that it seems like other people have more ideas of God than just that he exists, which the Rambam is very clear about making that the only God that exists, and everything else is basically evidence or whatever. We got to talk about that. It seems like other people have like one attribute of God is that he exists, but there's more things also that he is God, and whatever Gettlichkeit. You see, in Chabad talk about Gettlichkeit. What is Gettlichkeit? What does it mean? Give me another word for it. Kind of things that God is, right? In other words, you could be less godly and more godly, right?
Right.
There's a kind of thing that God is, and God is the most of it. Now, I know one of the things. According to the Rambam, there's only one thing, which is that Mechiv HaMetzias. That's the kind of thing that God is. Now, of course, maybe other things are Mechiv HaMetzias. That could be. We have to figure out what the proof is. That's only one Mechiv HaMetzias. He has a proof for that. It can only be one. But maybe if there's two, then you can do a problem. But that's one thing. But maybe there's more things that God is. In other words, because other people.
What is that thing Chabad saying, Taka? What is it?
I have no idea. They don't seem to define it. They just say godly.
No, like a pshitas.
But what does it mean?
What I think they mean like a pshitas as a pshitas is really really.
Well, what does it mean? Simplicity, exactly.
They're taking that aspect more Yisraelistic than the Mechiv HaMetzias.
I can tell you a lot. No, we can have different definitions for God. I'm not saying that this is the only definition that's possible. The Rambam is the only definition. Maybe even the Rambam has more definitions, and the Rambam's only definition also because he didn't want to have any other definitions.
They're pshitas also not the atzmus. Pshitas is the gila is the first like the atzmus.
So again, they have another whole language.
That's good.
But whatever. I'm not sure how they use words. We have to figure out. When you talk about gili, what does it mean? Like again, another question.
I don't think I answer. I have what they say. Whatever.
I feel always that he's also missing like basic philosophical terminology.
You hear him?
I see what he says.
What do you like Marshall about when?
I don't know. I just feel like that's they whatever. Okay, fine. It looks down the road. Because I'm asking you a simple thing.
Nachum is not like all. That's for sure.
That's also true.
Like if you're keeping your eye.
Definitely true.
What kind of philosophical thing do you think is missing? I'm just curious.
No, maybe I don't know. He doesn't know philosophy. He works. He reads Chabad and he tries to make it make sense to him.
No.
Most of the time.
Oh, the God could be separate. I don't know if he went.
No, he reads all
these books.
Sure he does. What do you think they said?
He knows the names. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you know what I mean. But ich weiß auch nicht.
No, he's always busy saying this whole thing. The Rambam doing machli between two philosophers, and he knows it.
Yeah, of course he knows.
Yeah,
so kids, we have to. I don't know. We have to. Yeah, but then I don't know. The kids.
I never say. What do you say?
I don't know.
Well, he's the only guy I think could talk to about it. That's all. Yeah, I don't know if I have exactly the right answer.
All the ideas of Atzmus, and we have to know what it means and what all these things supposed to mean. In any case, that's my. That's good.
But they're very busy.
God is more things besides for Ising, and that's definitely would make sense if disagreeing with it.
The house Irish nicht meshibit to the pshitas. That's his big thing. That's the nicht meshibit to pshitas.
It's not a question. Okay, but this is playing other games because what does that mean meshibit? That it's just reframing something in a way that sounds bad. He's also not meshibit to being God, so if he wants, he could be a bottle of seltzer. Man, that's stupid. They're just playing games with making it sound bad when it's not. Unless you have a different definition. I'm not saying I 100% think it's definitely true that until the Center came along, nobody called God Mechiv HaMetzias. And since he came along, it became like a popular name for God. And obviously there's other ways of understanding. It must be.
Yeah, the funny thing is Moshe Eisman, from
Yeah.
His Levaya, his son got up and say over there, you say that Yiddish, you say Muslims, every kid in his family knew this Lashon Balpeh. They got the guy. And he said, they wrote up a thing in the we went to the Rambam before we got the Hergish because the Rambam wrote these on the print.
Who said that?
Moshe Eisen. I guess it wasn't that? He said, no, they didn't write it right. The reason he liked the Rambam was the Rambam gave him like a picture, like a muslim. What is the Eibishter? This is what he says. Therefore, he felt the biggest Akaras. But no, the funny thing is that
the kids missed the boat. Whoever wrote it to miss the boat.
Different boat. But the funny thing is that he also, I don't think he thought that the Rambam is saying a whole major philosophical, like, in other words, he looked at the Rambam like, oh, like it's these are clear words. I always never understood. I'm saying like, many years ago, Google, what's the shot? No one else talks clearly. Right? The Rambam is the only one that talks clear. Mm-hmm. Like I was saying, there's a certain cloud. You don't realize that the Rambam is not like it's not the easiest thing. Okay.
He's very precise. He knows exactly what.
No, he's the only one. No, but what's you're saying? You get till 11. Police until 11. What's his name? Evan Sander. It's Sienna. No one spoke about this. In the Yiddish guys saying, "Who the Rambam?" No one spoke about this. Like no one talks about the Rosh one. Motzirish. Like what is this? New words. Whole bunch of new words. What is it?
That's big argument against the Rambam. If it would be so important, obviously, to work on
This is ready to flip.
No. I'm saying a regular person reads it has a certain geschmack. There's a certain geschmack in the Rambam that he's saying like Vom is talking clearly. Yeah. I'm forgetting this is it's misleading.
Yeah, but it's true. In other words, it's true that only people that know how it actually is can make it sound simple, make it clear. So clarity, this is
because he conceptualized it.
I once gave a whole shit about how it's impossible to think about what people thought, what people think simply, because that's just thinking. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that he wants to bring a raya for what he sees as Baal Shem Tov's understanding in Ashkenaz Prutis, which is the like a color Rishonim, not Kamiyat Rishonim, Rishonim color Rishonim. And he says,
look,
there's not even one. And he says, well, of course you can find one if you want to read. I don't know, sure, of course, but most, anyways. And he says, well, it could be that all of the people that are writing are the people that are thinking, but the Push the Eden, they thought like the Baal Shem Tov. So he's claiming that the Pashtus Lefnei Shegia Ramban v'Veisvus is like the Baal Shem Tov said, and the theory of Baal Shem Tov has a big makar from the unwritten people. And then so what I think about this is that you can't prove anything from that. I think it's a good argument. The problem is that those simple people, you could get them say the opposite also. Because the regular language, which is still today, also includes the other Yisod, that some things God doesn't care about, because otherwise Tefillah doesn't make sense. Otherwise, the shit is problematic for so many reasons. And you could get statements out of kids that says God is everywhere or God does every little thing. You could also get statements out of them that say the opposite.
They do all the time.
Anyone that says the Eibush isn't the best English and the Eibush come, all kind of there's languages.
This happened because of that, and that happened because of that. Right?
That's enough.
Why are you kind of stuff say it's meaningless what kids say?
So in other words, what I'm saying is that regular people, is not that they have more simple, more clear understanding. They have a less clear understanding. They're just confused. If you didn't think through something, you can't even say the pashtus. But I was saying, I was looking for the mushkil, so I wanted to give a shir on shkuch. I was Shittas Rambam is complex because he has 5 shittas and figure out which philosopher holds every shitta and how it matches. Why can't we find someone that? Let's first learn the push dipshan. What do the normal people think? Not the Rambam.
They're not thinking.
They don't think. So what do you want? In other words, there's no push it before that. There's no simple pshat. Then he has a confusing, complicated pshat. Only the confused people could have a simple, clear pshat. There's no pashtus that's before the confusion. There's confusion before the pashtus, which is the people that think that either they can have a thing. That's why it's very weird. And sadly, since a lot of the other people, even when they do think, they don't think it through. Like even the Rambam himself didn't think everything through more than he could have. So it's also like sometimes people say there's a stira Rambam has sibus astira, and one of the sibus is he didn't think it through.
Why does Rambam have to have some? I'm curious.
He liked that. He liked finding sources for things.
Yeah, so what do you tell?
He was not happy. No, he wasn't happy with that all the time. another. He liked having sources for things. He liked. No, it's problem because it's not whatever. Other problems.
I think it's about fascist and
You can't be kind of it's not about being mechadish. It's
how
fetish to happen. What does it even mean? Okay.
Listen. Alle Rishonim ook gegen Chazal also about
at least they try to work it out.
Because it's too fetish medrushim.
No, it's not. It's machlek medrushim, like everything else.
Oh, okay. It was.
Also, those medrushim, nobody knows what they mean.
And with the birds, with the birds,
There's one. I don't think that's. You talking about I don't think it's as simple as that. If he would have said that it's Chazal, then he wouldn't have this problem.
What?
If he would have said that it's just Chazal, he wouldn't have this problem. I know, but there's also a fetish Chazal other way, so we got to figure it out. Then the kid is.
How long have you
There's no pashtas. A bunch, but I never figured anything out. I don't know.
Yeah, figure it out.
All right, we went through the Rambam and the Rambam. The Rambam and the Rambam basically figured out. Chassidus we didn't figure out. I just said this sheet that you can't say that there's pashtas. There's pashtas. I'm thinking pashtas. I'm thinking is not pashtas. I'm thinking is confusion.
The development in the Shachar Everything does everything. Period. Everything is in the everything.
But that's not a bechol.
No. I'm saying that's the thing. Everything that happens to you is bashkach.
It's gefunden yet. Everything Hashem does, or everything is bashkach.
Everything that happens is directed by the Rebbe. That's
whoever wrote the first Ikka in the Siddur.
In the
Siddur.
Yeah, exactly.
He made it up something. He totally ruined it. But the reason is, I understand why.
Everyone says it.
I know that everyone agrees. But I also think that it's a very nice way to show how most people's concept of God is a lot, we could say a lot richer, maybe, if you want. But so it includes a lot more things than the Rambam's concept of God. And maybe what the Rambam thinks about those things is another sigya. But at least they divide it. Then God is just, let's see. Now, even manig is not. Manig, the Rambam says manig, he means turning the God. Right, manig like driver, not manig like feeding. Like big difference.
I like
manig like driver.
And that?
Not manig like manager. Manig means driver, not manager.
Feed it.
Like sometimes he's the manig of his car. It sounds weird, right? Not the manig of the car, he's the nahag of the car, right? And when the Rambam literally reads that medrash that says Yashal Abida Manhek to mean that Turner, very different. Anyways, so that's a very good example to show how most people, when you say God exists, they already think about Manek, Usav, Yas, and all of these things. And they didn't realize that even when the Rambam himself said it, that he divided it. Now we have to think about what does the Usav mean, all of these things are siggis for themselves, but they're different than the siggi of Matthias Hashem. And even the Pusik with Pashtas didn't differentiate. That's a big thing.
Even the
Pusik, when Chazal, they talk about, that's why I'm saying, that's what the Kizri says, we don't worship. And you have to really, when the Kizri says that, he himself is a little confused about this. Because when he says we don't worship the God of creation, we worship the God of Yetzias Mitzrayim. In other words, my concept of God is already confused. It already includes the one that takes it out of Mitzrayim. That's also the Push Pshat. Although the Push Pshat is not exactly like that.
Why not?
Because the Push Pshat, we have to read. When I read the Neich Hashem Lekecha, what I read is something like this. You know, a bunch of
pasuk. You mean?
The pasuk is something like you know a bunch of gods. Now, welcome. I'm the one that took you out of Egypt. That one. You don't know who took you out of Egypt. Have a minute as Baal took you out of Egypt. And how do we know that it's the same one? By the way, I don't know that it's the same one. Maybe it's a different one. Maybe he's lying. This is simple pshat. The Torah is living in a world of paganism. There's a bunch of gods. And the whole Mashamoy means which God is he? That's different touch. It doesn't mean like the Rambam says, give me a proof that God exists. Nobody has a doubt that the gods exist. But it's a question, which one is he? I'm not saying that this is the truth. I'm saying how the language of the Torah works like this. Which God is he? Father looks in his book, right there. We have this. Which God? Welche God is there? The High Evident. Okay, we know we've heard of that one. Yeah, and now we have to have a proof that it's the same one that can take out of Mitzrayim. Yeah, I'm going to give you proof that I'm the one that sent you. In other words, not that I'm pretending I'm some other God that maybe I'm just the guy by the bush and then some other third guy's going to take out of Mitzrayim. You'll come back here and I'll confirm that I was the same one. He was Mekayim that when he said, that's every time.
And how is he confirming it over there?
That they came back and he said, "Look, I'm the one."
He's the one in this area.
I don't know about this area. If I go, let's say I go to,
Whether they're coming back to here.
I meet you here. I tell you, look, I'm going to meet you there, but you're not going to see me there. It's going to be me. And to prove that it's me, come back and I don't know, maybe a middle was a third one. But that's definitely how it works. That's definitely how it works. Like you'll come back and you'll see that I'll confirm that it was Taka me. Maybe there's a third one in its name. I'm for sure that's the pshat of the pussy.
And
the Taka confirms it. I'm talking that one. No, the Vodim already makes it bigger. Sefer Vodim already has a more universal concept of God. That's not what happened in Tzitz Mitzrayim. That's not on that.
Hello. What do you mean?
Vodim is ready fighting with the Avedura of Canaan. It's already a whole new story. He's using that as a raya, but it's not what. Then there was a different channel.
He's not saying saying over here. He's saying the word Anoich Hashem Elokecha that took you out of Mitzrayim. He's like introducing himself.
Right.
He's not saying even then he's not saying it is I. He's not saying that it's I and not another one that took you out.
Right.
He's introducing himself. Is that what he said?
I think that the chiddush, in other words, there's not a chiddush that he exists. There's not a chiddush that there is a God exists. Of course not.
No, he said I am one. No, the meaning is who's speaking now. He's introducing himself.
We met in Mitzrayim already. How do we know you from? Which one?
Someone took you out of Mitzrayim. He's saying, and I am Hashem.
In other words, yes, Mitzrayim didn't have a name. Moshe came and said that.
No, he said that. We know it's from the office. We know this. We know this.
Exactly, but it's reconfirming the same thing because Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Eden. This is what happened. You have to understand the story like this. Moshe Rabbeinu comes to the Eden, whatever Erev Price, a long time before. Yeah. He tells them, "You're he's gonna send you out, take you out." Atkan. Now, by the way, if you look from then until well, there's the story of Chodesh Salachan which we have to reconcile with this. But besides for that, until they come to Dak Matan Torah, they don't hear anything from Moshe, the Yidden. Moshe talks with Paro, he doesn't talk with the Jews. If you notice, since the end of Parshas Shemos, Haltman told me this, since the end of Parshas Shemos, when he fights with the Ziknei Yisrael over there, after Yetzias Mitzrayim, Moshe doesn't talk to the Yidden at all. Besides for the mitzvah of making a conference. The ganze master them and then Zeros from Mitzrayim, the Makkahs, the Yidden are not a party to that story. It's between Moshe and Paro. The Paro got convinced that the Yodim Mitzrayim can Hashem, but the Yidden didn't get convinced. The Yidden got convinced, maybe by the Shib Sayam, but that's not
it's coming from that. It's a Makkah.
They believed, the one that believed. They heard from Moshe say, "Oh, this is Taka was the Tzigazuk," but Moshe wasn't talking to them then. The Irish at least wasn't being was Galit to them then. It says Vavarti Beretz Mitzrayim, but it's not. It's Mitzrayim. This is Galit. It's not the Yidden. I'm going to make a Makkah, but the Yidden, the ones that have him in are saying, "Oh, this is Taka was Moshe Tzigazuk," but it wasn't clear. Then they finally came to the Mamad Asina and they said, "Ich Taka Dev." In between, there was like a halama. It was like something happened. It didn't have a name. Anoich Hashem Elokecha was giving a name to what you saw 3 months ago. Because until then, it was not clear that it's Havaya Lecha Shetzich Mitzrayim.
Why? Because he didn't tell them. He told them I'm going to do it. Now
exactly. Now he confirmed that he did it, but what's
the voice he wanted the one thing in the beginning?
Because he didn't do it with a name.
He did too. He said he didn't
have a label. The Makkahs didn't come with a label.
What did he say? I'm taking it. Take you out of Mitzrayim.
He said. I say you have to. Firstly, I don't know if everyone heard of exactly who was there or what, but
everyone heard.
You said that they have a question. The whole time there's a question if they believe, right? What's the question? Do they believe that really live? Did he really talk to you? Is it real? It's the whole time a question, right? Moshe is trying to prove them that he's Taka Shliach from this Havaya person, right? From this Havaya God.
No, they didn't think that many Sveikas that he exists.
No, that's not the question if a God exists. That was not the question.
The question was if
he's
working.
God. No, if it's this God, that's what I'm saying.
This is what I'm saying.
I'm saying Keramban. They've all heard of this Havaya. Well, the Zaydas God. They daven to him sometimes or whatever.
Yeah,
but they didn't know that he's talking the one that takes them out of Mitzrayim. When it says V'yidatem ki ani avai amayt yaskem Mitzrayim, it means you're going to know that I am talking the one that did it.
Who else took them out of Mitzrayim?
Guy
no, I mean, who they gave to see them?
There's a lot of gods.
They gave to see them.
It does not sense, but it became he came. Now, if I tell the master I tell you, look, you're in trouble.
I'm not like, why do you have to scowl himself to prove that it was him?
It's not to prove. Maybe it's more to
confirm.
I don't know to prove. Maybe prove is the wrong word.
Okay, don't use the word prove. Why do you have to confirm that it was he that took
the out? He didn't show his face until then. It makes sense. If I come to you, I say, look, next week I'm gonna send you $100. And then after I send it, I come. I'm not being mechadish information. I'm making it confirming.
That's an interpretation and why he came afterwards. Like
that's
a question. We have to be mind what. If there was information, I think that's what it's saying. That's what it says. Now you're asking a question on why
No, I think he starts talking. He's talking to everyone. Who's talking now?
Well, the first time, by the way, it's the first time that he's talking to them.
Right, so you have to say who he is. I
understand. I agree with your pshat.
I agree. I think it's more.
I agree with your pshat, and it's also like Rashi says. But I also think that this because I have the raya from the Pusik in Parashat Shemos. The Zelecha Ois. I'm sure the Zelecha. What's the Ois? Can you know?
Yeah.
Ramban says the Tachlis said, but what's that got to do with the Ois?
Every 3 years.
But according to my pshat, that's what it means. You have to Ois ki amoichi shnachtichu. Otherwise, what's the Ois? And now I think now maybe I have a different pshat one. What's the raya that there's something also to do with the place. We have to figure out how to have to do with the place. That that's his place where he lives. Or
who
something.
said this Ois was the Klal Yisrael? I remember the Psukim time was so clear.
What is Ois? So Ois is always like the Ois. It's proving that it's not true. It's a proof, a demonstration, whatever you want to call it. No, but this is the Ois. But it says you'll come back to here. Okay, and what is it supposed to prove? It proves that I'm talking that the one that took you out from Mitzrayim is talking the one that lives in the Sneh, Shoich Nisneh. I think that's we have to understand how it works. I'm pretty sure that's what it means. Now I agree with it. The Renei Hashem Lekech is also just an introduction.
Yeah, they say it.
By the way, he also finished his introduction. Okay, the question and second Divra. Because it says and what should you do? Goodbye. In other words, he also signed off. Yeah. He also signed off. There's a two anoichis. There's two anoichis. And that's how he signs off. And he signs off from Sefer Vayikra like that all the time. And Hashem Lekachem. Goodbye.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. I'm saying that's and therefore the next Kabbalah is already Bilish in third person, right? That's Moshe talking. But he says Hashem Elekecha, right? It's not. That's Shemi. That's it, that's what Chazal took the Neichel V'Yelecha from. I'm just showing you that he also finished the Neichel when he finished his little introduction. And therefore, the only thing that God really ever asked us is not to have any other God. Everything else was Moshe. That's what the Rambam took his whole idea that this is the most important thing in one of the places.
Even though you don't say Gurim,
I said it, but that's exactly what it says.
God, the Neichel being a mitzvah say. And the Shilat always warm. It's very difficult because it's like it comes from the fact that Yilecha is Russian season. Otherwise, since a Neichi it comes together with the Yilecha.
So we have to. I was thinking.
I mentioned Shilat. I got he had like Domus. I didn't. I said I was surprised there was another thing.
No, his pshat is also here.
No. You have like Domus. Just like Domus.
Yeah. This is that book. It's this. It became smaller in the new version. They made better, smaller papers. Yes, he has pshat in the end and everything. Yeah. No, I said I think that the Rambam read this is what I told him last week. I think that the Rambam reads the Rambam thinks that Avodah Zarah is atheism because the Rambam's definition of God is so specific. So Avodah Zarah doesn't really have a God. How do you have a different God? There's no other God. There can only be one. So you can't say that Avodah Zarah is having two Hudim Avodah Zarah is someone that doesn't have. When you read the Rambam of Avodah Zarah, it says it's a fetish. As man Avraham Avinu, nobody knew about God. Nobody knew about God. That's how he understood that Avraham Avinu found the proof from the man of Galgal. He says it's a fetish in every hand. But therefore, Avodah Zarah is just atheism. And therefore, going to Shitz Rambam, you can't really, I don't know, it makes a big nachmina this whole thing.
He doesn't
the only thing that Rambam added.
He doesn't call him. He doesn't call him because he says afterwards by Elisa Sudu. Right? He says not only this, even Iker, not only the Zara, but even call Iker.
Yeah, love the little battle. Call Iker. She saw some Iker.
It's not over the Zara. Not over the Zara.
I think that's his. I think that's him, Matt, pushing what it says into what he thinks. Because maybe he doesn't really think that it's a problem to read about the other book because he did it himself. No, I think he really. I think that whenever the Rambam makes a klal out of a prat, he really thinks that the klal is what's important, and he just kind of like a proof. That's another example. I believe that when the Rambam does this all the time. So the Rambam's book goes like this. He summarizes what it says in Talmud and Gemara mostly, and sometimes Midrash, other stuff like that. But he also wants it to make sense. And he keeps on, even in halacha, he keeps on jumping between these two things. And you see him doing it. I showed him the Shiva a lot of times. He can't skip anything that's important. A chilek that's really, he studies the chilek in the sugya. He can't just skip it. He can't do that. It's his book. It's a sikkim of Kol HaPerek Chilek. Once upon a time, he has a chitz with just skip something, but he usually doesn't. Then there's machlokes if he just forgot or. But what he does do is he tries to have, or in the beginning or in the end, or somewhere in almost every halacha, not all of them, but a lot of halachas, he kind of gives his cloud or his summary of it, or his loy oid ela. He always does loy ela. I'll give you an example. Nechas Shiva, and I think this is the same thing. Nechas Shiva, it says like this: Al pei mishenat Shiva elam mitzvahs. I think that what's really going on, the Rambam thinks ikrat Shiva is mitzvahs. But he couldn't do it because the Torah talks about mitzvahs. So he said, this is also a mitzvah. That was like, mitzvahs are also a mitzvah anyway. Mitzvahs are also a mitzvah because it's velach b'dracha. But he's saying, what it really means, in other words, the Rambam reads very serious. It's not really about it. It's about, that's an example of a thing that's connected to that. And Mezuraman is to read the stuff or whatever. I think wrongly about it. And people read it backwards because they think, he's making a sofa. It's not really a sofa. It's really, I understand why he wrote like this. He wrote this because that's what it says, and he has to take out the klal out of the prat. So it's all backwards. But I have more examples. Think of the Zurah is also like this. So it goes backwards. He says, and then he just made up. I mean, it doesn't say in the whole Masechta it doesn't say this, right? Whatever the Zurah is doesn't say in Kol Masechta at all.
I don't know what the Zurah is.
We assume that we know. I don't know. I don't think anyone knew what the Rambam knew. Because this whole idea, the Rambam made up an idea. I really want to be Michael to negative the Rambam. Because the Rambam says that the Zurah is, part of the Ikkaris of the Zurah is not to make a mitzvah between God and you. The Rambam literally made this up. There's no makar for it. And I don't know why he made it up, because of the whole story that he has, and because he tries to understand it. But I don't know why. I chabarai from the Siddur that we don't hold like this.
What do you Yashka? What do you think?
Not Yashka, because it doesn't have Mr. Rachman, whatever, all this kind of thing.
No, I don't mean the Siddur. I think, why don't you make it up? What story?
Because the Rambam understood that the Rambam's way of understanding reality is that could only be one God. So the Zud doesn't really make sense to him. In the old way of understanding God,
what doesn't make sense to him?
There could be two different gods. The Shal is which is the right one. Yeah. Which one is the one that, I don't know what that means. I read too much Rambam I don't understand it, but that's how the Pusik seems to be. There's a bunch of gods. I'm the real one, the only real one, whatever, so on. But I'm the only ask what it means to God, so the Ramban already had understanding, maybe the Maluch, but whatever it means, the right one is this one. In the Rambam's understanding, it's not possible to talk about two gods. It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
Therefore, what is Avodah Zarah all about? He came up with a theory that Avodah Zarah started with Dor Emesh. I don't know if maybe he had rise to this, but that they made him tzon. They said we're not worship. We know that there's one Mechiv Mitzvahs, but since he's for whatever reason we have to go on to the Gechavim.
Making out this whole insane business.
Yeah, it's only because of this whole. And then he said they forgot, and then it seems to the Rambam even after this, I think that the Rambam understands that Isser Lavadam Tzoy is like a geder. You shouldn't forget.
Right,
first
it's like exile.
It's like exile.
Yeah,
all of it. So that's what I say.
There's no problem with it. No problem.
Right. But why should there be a problem? Avodah is exile or atheism. Right. The Rambam understanding of atheism, right? Not only. And Therefore, but that's I think that's just made up.
What was that? What?
Avodah Zarah is exciting. Exciting. She should become an atheist.
Now who's that?
The Rambam is atheist. Where because according to the Rambam, most Jews are also atheists, but they don't understand what Mechiva Metzias means. If your God is only the God that took you out of Mitzrayim, you could still be an atheist in the Rambam's understanding. Because God means Mechiva Metzias. Anyone can take you out of Mitzrayim. A star could also do it. That's not what God is. That's why the Rambam says that if your God is a magician and you're basically Avodah Zarah, you're basically don't have a God. It says in Chelik Aleph. Even worse, he says even worse. Worse than yeah. So, but therefore, I think that if you don't understand it like this, even after you understand, if you're not choishes to Avodah Zarah, then you could daven to him. So no problem. I don't understand the problem. It's only excited. Like okay. In other words, I don't have a makar. The pashtus the Gemara is that if you're not makabel beliha, there's no chashash Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says the fetish mispal. Choshev l'shamayim, right? If you made a mistake, you thought that Avodah Zarah is a besmedrash. It's mit to the chatchila. Not only is mit you do it, we're mistachva lebesek knesset, right? The Gemara says Choshev andrati v'shtachla v'sofa l'shemesh l'knesset. It's not even a shoygig. It's mit to the chatchila. It's libe l'shamayim. Avodah Zarah. No. Yeah. And according to the in other words. What do you mean? According to the Rambam, even libel Hashemayim is not enough. You have to also be libel Hashemayim, liyam tzoyim. And bichlal, according to the Rambam, it's very shver how we could be mishtach v'lebes hakneses or lebes hamikdash. Doesn't really work. It's very shver. Because you understood this problem we talked about a lot. But because you said that there's no real difference between lebes hamikdash and Avodah Zarah, only that this is Ratzon Hashem and that's not Ratzon Hashem. But the Rambam can't agree with such a pshat. Yeah, the Rambam can't agree with such a pshat. Therefore, the Rambam has to make this whole new issue of being mishtachvel, being oived. And lekabel beleha, what does it mean according to the Rambam? I don't even know what it means. This is my problem. I still don't understand. There's no Avodah Zarah. What does it mean, Eliata? And there's such a thing. You take a levayim when you say Eliata. I'm not going to do it because you can say that. And then that's Avodah Zarah. It's skill.
And doesn't mean something to do with the Allah.
Means you make a Muhammad Kabbalah or Malchus.
Do you think this has independent power?
That's the Rambam. No, even the Rambam has nothing to do with that. The Rambam thinks you're not allowed to make him. So even if you don't think it has independent power, what is independent? The Rambam really believes that thing has independent power. It can't be this. This chat only believes if you believe in Ashtucha like Hashem. The Rambam believes that things have. I don't know if it's independent. They don't have independent existence, but they have independent power. I don't know. Bechira is an example of that. But even the Teva is just what it is. It's not. God doesn't change it every minute. He made it and fill in him and so on. But there's really the Chateva in the Rambam's understanding.
Right.
So what does it mean worship to it? And of course, maybe worshipping is stupid. So Shalit, what does it mean? Rambam,
what is worship? So it
goes like this. So it goes like this. No, what avoid after understanding it?
Yeah, but what's avoid?
I better to think about actively. About the what do I want to say? So what happens is something like this. So the Rambam, this is negate Hilchos Kishuf from different. The whole machlokas today, all the controversies about Kishuf are all because of these confusion. The Rambam understands things like something like this. Anything that naturally works can't be Avodah Zarah. Because it works. What could be wrong with it? LMI, some things don't work, so they're stupid. So that's why they're us. That's not really why they're us, of course not. That's just stupid. Really, why they're us? Why you're not allowed to do Kishuf? If it would work, that's why the Rambam has to say. No, if Kishuf would work, then the Rambam has to say that you're allowed to, because he doesn't believe that it's to do anything natural. Can't be such a issue. Right? In the Ramban, that's not a problem, because the Ramban thinks Kishuf works, and you're not allowed to do it, because it's clippers, it's malachim. And the Rambam can't, that doesn't make sense. It's like the Rambam doesn't understand if he, like anything. So, therefore, if it works, LMI, if it doesn't work, what's wrong? That's stupid. Said it. Stupid is not Avodah Zarah. Problem with it not working is that the Avodah Zarah make this into Avodah Zarah. They make you forget about God, basically. Forget about Mechiva Metzias somehow. Because you might go through this seder of Avodah Zarah Perek Aleph again. And if you do too much kishuf, you'll fall through that. So it's all excited of this Shikkas Mechiva Metzias. And therefore, it doesn't really make sense to ask questions in the Rambam's shit. Like the Rashba got very confused about the Rambam. What is exact? How could you say Kol Shipish Medafir Emishim Darkei Amayri? And then you say, we got all of the Raza Bishkash. The Raza has a big problem with the Rambam in this. Like the only things that don't work are us. So what does this even mean? They don't work. No. What are we talking about? But I don't think the Rambam's problem is that they work or they don't work. His problem was that they bring it out as a.
And they take you away from.
Yeah, the Rashba has this problem because the Gemara says beferish that the Chizas Enaim is us, not Mederaisa, but it's us. Even Eichus Enaim put it up with us. Eichus Enaim doesn't make any sense in the Rambam's shit. All of it is Eichus. So I think that according to the Rambam, Lamasa, if something is not bringing you over the Zura, then it should be mitzvah. But of course, if it's stupidity, they shouldn't do it anyway. So that's why it's not coming on the Lamasa.
Yeah, everything is a chizuk now according to the Rambam because there's no mitzvah.
There's no real kishuf.
There is no such a thing.
Right.
The
Rambam says, the Rambam brings it. I remember he brings it actually. The Fetish brings it on so the Zura, the Eichel Seinai.
It's not a tivius. It's not a tivius. A tivius is good.
If it's tivius, then it's mitzvah lechatchilek or I'm not only mitzvah like I have to remember what is. I don't remember this. But this all adds up to this whole question. Therefore, I'm just saying that halacha lemasa. I'm just saying that halacha lemasa is a machlokes is hard to give us if you're allowed to make a magic show. Maybe it's like a snap. But according to that one, it's a show mitzvah. If you go according to the time at least. Because as long as nobody, if you don't, it's not part of any worship. It's not. If you go to a church or whatever, I don't know if church is a town. If you go to a church that doesn't believe in Mechira Mitzvahs, and they tell you that they're going to heal you by anything, they basically, even if it's something real, you're not allowed to go. And what does that mean? Even if it's real. Because you can become over the Zuri, you're going to forget about Mechira Mitzvahs. But if you're just making a magic show, then there's no like, unless you like a Gzairis Akosef or something, I don't know.
I think that calls him who is brought up for that.
So, I don't know. He doesn't say Boyer. I thought someone told me that Boyer was one of them. Maybe it was just lying. I don't know. Maybe you have to look at that. We have to make. It's one of the things that I'm gonna. Very interesting to me.
That's very interesting. There's a hero here of Shai Sheminovitz. No. His wife was she was a Briskman. Yeah, was Scully read by the Aiden Briskman. I once went to Polish prison with her. She kept on saying, think of like a few minutes ago what was going on. She kept on saying, she would call the Aiden Briskman like really good number.
Oh.
That was what she talked about. She kept saying, the Heilige number was job. I know what she was saying. They want that's why she obviously she got it from somewhere. She didn't make this up, and she was saying like so fast.
I was always wondering who was the first to call Hashem Hashem. I think it's Art Scroll.
Nah, Art Scroll came much later.